My husband invited me to a lavish dinner with his new international client. I smiled politely and pretended I did not understand a single syllable of their rapid Spanish. I sat perfectly still as I listened to the man I married casually map out a plan to steal $2 million from our joint accounts. I kept my breathing steady as he laughed about his pregnant mistress and his one-way ticket to Cabo on my upcoming birthday. He had absolutely no idea that I understood every single word, and he had no idea that his careless confession had just sealed his own destruction. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a betrayal while planning your revenge. My name is Chloe, and I am 32 years old. I work as a forensic financial advisor right here in the heart of Atlanta. To the outside world, my husband Julian and I were the ultimate power couple. At 35, Julian was a highly successful commercial real estate broker. He was handsome, charismatic, and obsessed with maintaining the perfect image of a thriving Black family within our affluent community and our social circles. We drove the right cars, attended the right galas, and sat in the right pews at church every Sunday morning. But behind closed doors, our marriage required constant maintenance. Julian had an ego that needed to be fed, stroked, and protected at all costs. He liked to feel like the absolute center of gravity in our household. Because I loved him, I played my part. I downplayed my own rigorous career analyzing corporate fraud and tracing hidden assets. I let him take the spotlight at social events, while I stood quietly by his side, the picture of a supportive and unassuming wife. I thought this compromise was just the price of a peaceful marriage. I was entirely wrong. The defining moment of my life unfolded on a warm Tuesday evening at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in downtown Atlanta. The restaurant was a fortress of dark mahogany, dim lighting, and the low hum of wealthy patrons making high-stakes deals. Julian had insisted I join him for a business dinner to help entertain a new investor. He wanted to project the image of a stable, grounded family man. I wore a tailored emerald green dress, styled my hair perfectly, and arrived prepared to be the gracious host he expected. When Julian walked into the restaurant, he was accompanied by a man he introduced as Diego Morales, a fast-talking broker, visiting from Miami. Diego wore a suit that was a little too flashy and had an arrogant smile that instantly put me on edge. I shook his hand politely and offered a warm greeting. As we were seated at a secluded corner table, the waiter immediately brought over a bottle of vintage red wine that Julian had pre-ordered. The men toasted to new ventures and lucrative partnerships. I took a small sip of my sparkling water, prepared for a long evening of real estate jargon and inflated male egos. Almost immediately, Julian began his usual routine of establishing his dominance. He leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the expensive wine in his glass, and gestured toward me with a condescending smile. "Diego, my beautiful wife Chloe, here is just a simple number cruncher," Julian said in English, his tone dripping with patronizing affection. "She likes to stay home and play with her little spreadsheets while the men handle the real business. Do not bore her with the complex details of our acquisitions. She prefers not to worry her pretty head about high-level finance." A sharp spike of irritation flared in my chest. I could have humiliated him right then and there. I could have told Diego that my little spreadsheets had put multiple corrupt CEOs behind bars. I could have mentioned that I untangle webs of corporate money laundering for a living. Instead, I swallowed my pride for the sake of Julian's fragile ego. I offered Diego a demure, soft smile, playing the role of the harmless, naive wife flawlessly. Julian beamed, clearly satisfied that he had established his superior position at the table. As the appetizers arrived, Julian and Diego shifted their conversation. Assuming I was entirely monolingual and thoroughly checked out of their business discussions, they seamlessly switched from English to rapid colloquial Spanish. They wanted to speak privately, right in front of my face. Julian knew my background was simply African American. What he completely ignored, or perhaps never bothered to truly remember during our entire relationship, was the rich history of my maternal bloodline. My late grandmother was proudly Afro-Cuban. I spent every summer of my childhood with her, fully immersed in her culture. She had rigorously drilled the Spanish language into me until I was entirely fluent. I could speak read and understand it as effortlessly as English. But because Julian had once made a dismissive comment early in our dating years about my heritage not fitting his specific elite Atlanta image, I had buried that part of myself. I never spoke Spanish around him. I never mentioned it to his family. So as they conversed in Spanish across the table, they thought I was deaf to their words. I kept my eyes focused on my salad, carefully slicing a cherry tomato, while my ears tuned in to every single syllable. The transition in their tone was jarring. The professional banter vanished, replaced by the hushed conspiratorial urgency of thieves. Diego leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "So is everything ready for the transfer? The offshore accounts in Panama are set up and waiting, but we need the capital moved before the end of the month." I paused, chewing my heart, skipping a slow, heavy beat. Panama, offshore accounts. None of this aligned with Julian's standard commercial real estate portfolios. Julian laughed quietly in Spanish, taking a confident sip of his wine. "Relax, Diego. It is completely handled. The $2 million from our joint investment account will hit the Panama routing numbers next Friday without a single issue. It is completely untraceable. $2 million. The entirety of our life savings, our investments, the safety net we had built together over a decade." My mind reeled, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the theft being discussed inches from my face. Diego glanced at me nervously, then looked back at Julian. "Are you sure she does not know? What if she checks the balances? What if she gets suspicious before the wire clears?" Julian chuckled, a sound that made my blood run instantly cold. He looked right at me, his eyes full of absolute contempt, masked by a charming smile. I smiled back, maintaining my pleasant, vacant expression. "Do not worry about my naive wife," Julian said in Spanish, his voice dripping with cruelty. "She suspects absolutely nothing. She trusts me blindly. She leaves all the major banking to me. By the time she realizes the accounts are completely drained, I will be long gone." The funds hit Panama next Friday. It happens to be her birthday, actually. I told her I am going on a weekend golf trip with some investors. Diego smirked, cutting into his steak. "A golf trip. Very smooth. And what about Elena? Is she ready to travel?" The name hit me like a physical strike to the chest. Elena, the 24-year-old receptionist at Julian's brokerage firm. The girl with the bright smile who always fetched my coffee when I visited his office. The girl Julian claimed was just a hard-working intern. "Elena is fully packed," Julian replied, his voice softening in a way it had not softened for me in years. "She is 4 months pregnant now. The baby needs a beach view. We are catching a private midnight flight to Cabo right after the funds clear on Friday. I have already secured the luxury rental under the Shell Corporation. Let Chloe wake up on her birthday to an empty house and empty bank accounts. It is time I start my real life with my real family." I sat there in the dim light of the steakhouse, surrounded by the clatter of silverware and the murmur of wealthy diners. Inside, an entire future was violently collapsing. My husband of 7 years was actively stealing my life savings to fund a new life with his pregnant receptionist. I was planning to abandon me on my birthday, leaving me financially ruined while he lived in luxury in Mexico. The shock was absolute, but the grief never came. Not a single tear formed in my eyes. I did not feel the urge to scream or flip the table or throw my wine in his face. Instead, I bit the inside of my cheek. I bit down hard until the sharp metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth, using the physical pain to anchor me to the present moment. As the metallic taste of blood grounded my racing mind, the devoted, compromising wife Julian had known died completely. In her place, the forensic financial advisor awoke. My brain immediately began categorizing the evidence. Panama routing numbers, Shell corporations, wire fraud, $2 million. Next Friday. I had exactly 10 days to dismantle this man's entire existence. Julian switched back to English, his demeanor instantly transforming back into the attentive, loving partner. He reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "Enjoying your salad, baby?" he asked, his voice smooth and caring. I looked into the eyes of the man planning to destroy me. I let my lips curve into the warmest, most adoring smile I could muster. I squeezed his hand back tightly. "It is absolutely perfect, darling," I replied, my voice steady and sweet. I am just so happy to be here celebrating your success. Julian beamed, turning to Diego to share a triumphant look. Diego raised his glass in a silent toast. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was the prey. They had absolutely no idea that I was already calculating exactly how to orchestrate their total and absolute ruin. The drive home from the steakhouse was a masterclass in deception. Julian blasted his favorite jazz playlist, drumming his fingers against the leather steering wheel of his sports car, completely oblivious to the predator sitting in his passenger seat. He talked endlessly about Diego, praising the man's business acumen, while I nodded and offered agreements at all the right intervals. By the time we walked through the front doors of our sprawling Atlanta estate, he was convinced he was the smartest man in the world. He kissed my forehead, told me he had an early morning, and went straight upstairs. I waited in the dark of the kitchen, counting the minutes. I listened to the familiar sounds of his nighttime routine. The shower running, the heavy thud of his footsteps across the hardwood floors, and finally the deep, rhythmic sound of his snoring echoing down the hallway. He slept with the peace of a man who believed his lies were bulletproof. He slept like a man who thought I was nothing more than a pretty accessory. My hands were steady. There were no tears burning in my eyes, no crushing weight of heartbreak pressing down on my chest. The woman who loved him had evaporated the moment those Spanish words left his mouth. I felt nothing but cold, clinical adrenaline. I was in my element now. I slipped out of the kitchen and moved silently down the hall to his home office. The room was a monument to his ego, filled with framed awards photos, with prominent community leaders, and expensive mahogany furniture. I bypassed his desk entirely and went straight for the hidden safe behind his bookshelf. I knew the combination. It was the date he closed his first $1 million commercial deal, a date he valued far more than our wedding anniversary. Inside the safe was his secondary laptop, the one he claimed was strictly for sensitive client data. I pulled it out, set it on the glass coffee table, and retrieved my own secure work drive from my handbag. I connected the devices and booted up my forensic software. For the past decade, I had made a lucrative career out of dismantling the financial defenses of corrupt executives. Julian was a skilled real estate broker, but in the digital landscape of hidden assets, he was an amateur playing against a seasoned veteran. I quickly bypassed his basic password protections and mirrored his IP address, masking my digital footprint so he would never see the login history. The screen illuminated the dark room with a harsh blue glow as folders began to decrypt and spill their secrets across my monitor. I did not waste time looking at his daily checking accounts. I went straight for the hidden offshore routing numbers he had mentioned to Diego. It took me less than 15 minutes to crack the security on a hidden folder, labeled with a generic real estate code. Inside, I found the exact routing information for the private bank in Panama. I analyzed the wire transfer requests he had queued up. The transactions were carefully scheduled for next Friday, my birthday, designed to drain every single joint investment account we possessed. I had arranged it so the alerts would be sent to a burner email address, ensuring I would wake up on my birthday completely financially ruined, while he was already halfway to Mexico. But the Panama accounts were just the beginning. I needed to see exactly where his current liquid cash had been flowing over the past year. I initiated a deep dive into a shell LLC he had registered under a vague consulting name. The corporate registry listed him as the sole managing director, but the expenses tied to the company accounts told a vastly different story. The transactions read like a diary of a parallel life. There were monthly lease payments for a luxury high-rise condo in the trendy Buckhead district, an area known for exorbitant rent prices and exclusive high society living. There were massive charges at high-end maternity boutiques, specialized prenatal vitamins, and expensive private ultrasound clinics. Then I found the target of these expenses. Elena. I opened a folder containing scanned leasing agreements and medical insurance forms. Her full name, date of birth, and identification were staring right back at me. She was 24 years old. She was the bright-eyed receptionist who always greeted me with a sugary smile when I brought Julian lunch at his brokerage firm. She was the girl who pretended to be a struggling student needing mentorship. The girl Julian claimed was just a hardworking intern. He was helping out of the goodness of his heart. According to the medical billing codes I uncovered, she was exactly 4 months pregnant. Julian was not just funding an affair. He was fully subsidizing a parallel family, using a shell corporation to hide the paper trail from me and from the IRS. The sheer audacity of his setup was staggering. I had been paying for her designer maternity clothes and her premium health care while coming home to me and complaining about how tight our budget was due to a slow real estate market. He had weaponized my trust and used my income to cushion his secret life. I downloaded every single PDF, every receipt, and every bank statement, transferring them directly onto my encrypted drive. These documents were the ammunition I would use to absolutely decimate his standing in the community. Julian prided himself on his image as a righteous, upstanding black man who led community outreach programs and sat on church committees. This folder was his complete undoing. I moved to the next phase of the audit, analyzing the $2 million he planned to transfer to Panama. I pulled up our joint investment accounts, ready to trace the source of the capital. I cross-referenced his recent commission statements, our savings, and the stock portfolios we had built together since we got married. I stopped. I stared at the screen, my forensic instincts screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The numbers simply did not add up. Our liquid cash and joint stock portfolios combined barely equaled $800,000. Julian was a successful broker, but the market had been challenging, and his lavish lifestyle ate into his profits significantly. There was no mathematical way he had $2 million in liquid capital sitting in those accounts waiting to be moved. I ran the algorithms again, searching for hidden deposits, recent property sales, or unexpected windfalls. Nothing. The math was entirely disjointed. I zoomed in on the pending wire transfer document he had drafted for the Panamanian bank. The source of the funds was listed as an escrow payout from a massive collateral loan. A cold chill crept down my spine. The money was not coming from his commercial deals. It was not coming from our shared savings. The money was a lump sum payout from a massive loan, but the collateral required to secure $2 million in cash would have to be an immense unencumbered asset. We did not own any commercial properties outright. Our primary residence was still under a strict mortgage. I began frantically digging into the loan origination documents, searching for the collateral he had used to secure the cash. My heart hammered against my ribs as I accessed the bank records tied to the escrow payout. The money was coming from somewhere else entirely. He had tapped into an asset I had not even considered, checking an asset that was meant to be completely off limits. Before I could open the specific property deed file to confirm the source of the collateral, a sharp creak echoed from the hallway outside the office. My blood ran ice cold. The heavy, unmistakable sound of Julian's footsteps approached the office door. He was awake. I moved with the speed of a cornered animal. I yanked my encrypted flash drive from the USB port, shoved it into the deep pocket of my silk robe, and slammed the laptop shut. I grabbed the device, sliding it seamlessly back into his hidden wall safe, and locked it just as the brass handle of the office door began to turn. I spun around, dropping to my knees beside his mahogany desk, and pulled open the bottom drawer where we kept a small first aid kit. The door swung open, casting a long shadow across the carpet. Julian stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowed, his large frame filling the space. He wore sweatpants, his chest bare, looking groggy but entirely alert. "What are you doing in here?" Julian asked, his voice thick with sleep, but laced with a sharp edge of suspicion. "It is 3 a.m. I looked up at him, keeping my breathing perfectly even. I allowed my face to soften into an expression of mild discomfort, playing the innocent wife to perfection. "I am so sorry, baby," I whispered, rubbing my temples. "I woke up with a terrible migraine and I did not want to turn on the bedroom lights and wake you. I remembered we kept the extra pain relievers in your desk drawer." I held up a small white bottle of ibuprofen, shaking it slightly so the pills rattled. Julian's tense posture relaxed instantly. The suspicion melted from his eyes, replaced by that familiar patronizing warmth he used to manipulate me. He walked over, extending his hand to help me up from the floor. He pulled me against his chest, wrapping his arms around me. "You should have woken me up," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "Let us go back to bed. You need your rest. You have been working too hard on your little spreadsheets." I leaned into his embrace, resting my cheek against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and calm. He had no idea he was holding the architect of his demise. "You are right," I said softly, letting him guide me out of the office and down the dark hallway. I will take these and go straight to sleep. As we walked back to the master bedroom, my hand remained buried deep in the pocket of my robe, my fingers tightly gripping the encrypted flash drive. The painkiller excuse had bought me time, but the terrifying mystery of the $2 million still hung in the air. Julian had leveraged something massive, something hidden to fund his escape with Elena. I climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling as Julian quickly fell back asleep beside me. The game had escalated far beyond a simple affair. I was not just dealing with a cheating husband anymore. I was sleeping next to a financial predator, and I had exactly 9 days to uncover his final secret and burn his world to ashes. Sunday afternoon arrived with the suffocating humidity, typical of an Atlanta summer, but the oppressive weather did nothing to deter the elite of our community from gathering. We were attending the annual summer cookout, hosted by Julian's mother Clarice, at her sprawling estate in Cascade. The winding driveway was packed to the street with luxury SUVs, and the meticulously manicured lawn was crowded with prominent church elders, local politicians, and wealthy business owners. This event was the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence, or at least the carefully curated illusion of it that my husband's family worked so tirelessly to project. I wore a tailored yellow sundress, holding a sweating glass of sweet tea, and played the role of the dutiful, adoring wife to absolute perfection. Julian was completely in his element. He stood near the massive outdoor stone grill, holding a pair of stainless steel tongs like a royal scepter, laughing loudly with the senior deacons from our church. He was charming, magnetic, and completely full of deceit. I watched him throw his head back in laughter, playing the generous community provider, while knowing with absolute certainty that he was actively plotting to bankrupt me. I maintained a serene smile. The physical pain from biting my cheek 2 nights ago had faded, but the cold, calculating focus remained embedded in my bones. I was a ghost walking among the living, silently observing my prey. My fragile peace was abruptly shattered when Clarice and Vanessa cornered me near the patio seating area. Clarice was a formidable woman, who wore her social status like a suit of armor. Her hair was perfectly styled into an immaculate bob, and she looked at me with the same thinly veiled contempt she had harbored since the day Julian first introduced us. Beside her stood Vanessa, Julian's older sister and the undisputed golden child of the family. Vanessa ran a high-end fashion boutique in Midtown, drove an imported sports car she could barely afford to insure, and carried herself with an unearned, suffocating sense of superiority. "Chloe, darling." Clarice said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, loud enough for the nearby church ladies in their wide-brimmed hats to hear. "You look so thin today. Are you making sure Julian gets hot meals at home? A man carrying the heavy weight of a commercial empire needs proper nourishment to sustain his success." "Julian eats very well, Clarice," I replied evenly, keeping my tone perfectly respectful and pleasant. Vanessa let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and looked me up and down with obvious disdain. "Well, he certainly works hard enough for the both of you. It is a true blessing that my brother is such a phenomenal provider. I honestly do not know how he manages the massive stress of his firm while you play around with your little accounting job. I am a forensic financial advisor," I thought to myself. "I dismantle corporate fraud rings and send white-collar criminals to federal prison." But I simply smiled and took a slow sip of my iced tea. "I enjoy my work, Vanessa. It keeps my mind incredibly sharp." Clarice sighed loudly, placing a manicured hand over her heart in a highly theatrical display of maternal concern. "A married woman's mind should be focused on building a legacy, Chloe. Julian is 35 years old. He needs a strong son to carry on his name and inherit his empire. You spend so much time looking at spreadsheets when you should be looking at fertility clinics. Julian is far too patient with you. Any other man in our circle would have demanded an heir by now." The absolute hypocrisy of her words almost made me laugh out loud. Julian was not patient. He was simply building his legacy in another woman's womb. He was actively having a child with a 24-year-old receptionist, while his mother stood in front of our entire community and publicly shamed my empty uterus. I looked at Vanessa, who was smirking in complete agreement with her mother. They thoroughly enjoyed putting me down. They thrived on making me feel inadequate because it elevated their own inflated sense of self-worth and justified their elitist complex. We are fully trusting God's timing. Clarice, I said, reciting the exact polite, faithful phrase I knew the eavesdropping church elders nearby would approve of. I excused myself smoothly, claiming I needed to fetch fresh ice for the beverage station before the sweet tea ran warm. I walked into the massive air-conditioned kitchen, deeply grateful for the sudden quiet. The sprawling granite countertops were covered in expensive catering trays, and the hired house staff was busy out by the pool serving appetizers. The kitchen appeared empty, or so I thought. As I reached for the heavy silver ice bucket on the far counter, I heard hushed, frantic voices coming from the adjacent walk-in pantry. It was Vanessa and her husband Terrence. Terrence was a notoriously quiet man, usually entirely overshadowed by his dominant, demanding wife, but right now his voice was tight with genuine, suffocating panic. I stepped closer to the heavy wooden door of the pantry, holding my breath, my forensic instincts immediately locking onto the sheer terror in his tone. "You need to send the money back immediately!" Vanessa Terrence hissed, his voice shaking with fear. "I looked at your boutique's corporate ledger this morning. The $300,000 Julian wired you last week did not come from his personal checking account. It is dirty money. The routing numbers trace back to a massive collateral loan payout." Vanessa scoffed, the sound sharp and entirely dismissive. "Keep your voice down, Terrence. You are acting like a pathetic coward. My boutique was facing total bankruptcy. Julian simply did what a good, successful brother does and bailed his family out. The specific source of the cash is not our problem to worry about. It becomes our problem when it is federal wire fraud." Terrence fired back, raw desperation leaking into his words. "Julian told me about Elena. He told me she is 4 months pregnant and that they are flying to Cabo next Friday night on a one-way ticket. Do you have any idea what happens when Chloe wakes up, realizes he abandoned her, and sees the drained accounts? She is going to hire ruthless lawyers. She is an auditor. She is going to follow the money trail straight to your front door. When she finds out Julian stole from her to save your failing store, we are all going to federal prison. You are an accessory to grand theft." My heart stopped beating. The kitchen felt like a vacuum, entirely devoid of oxygen. Julian had not just drained our accounts to flee with his pregnant mistress. He had funneled $300,000 of stolen funds to save Vanessa's failing boutique. The missing pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. That was why the math had not made sense last night on his laptop. Julian was actively distributing the stolen collateral to his family before fleeing the country, buying their silence and loyalty with my stolen assets. Vanessa did not sound afraid. She sounded utterly ruthless and detached. "Chloe is an absolute idiot," Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "She does not know the first thing about real money or corporate leverage. Julian handles her completely. When he leaves, she will cry, she will file for a messy divorce, and she will accept whatever scraps the court gives her because she is too weak and embarrassed to fight back publicly. My brother is securing his own happiness, and he secured our business in the process. Our family's image and our financial standing in Atlanta matter significantly more than her pathetic feelings." "This is highly illegal," Vanessa Terrence pleaded. "If Chloe finds out about Elena or the money, Chloe will find out when Julian is safely sipping drinks on a beach in Mexico, and by then it will be entirely too late for her to do anything about it," Vanessa snapped. "Now go wash your face, walk back out to that patio, and act like a man who actually belongs in this powerful family. Do not ruin my mother's party with your paranoia." Heavy footsteps moved toward the pantry door. I backed away instantly, gliding silently across the kitchen floor. I grabbed the silver ice bucket and opened the freezer door, pretending to be deeply engaged in filling the container, when Vanessa and Terrence walked out of the pantry. Vanessa smoothed down her expensive designer dress, her face instantly transforming from a vicious, calculating conspirator into the radiant, welcoming hostess. Terrence looked pale and sickly, avoiding my gaze entirely as he rushed past me toward the backyard to get a drink. "Oh, Chloe," Vanessa said, brightly, pausing near the kitchen island to adjust her jewelry. "I did not see you come in. Do you need help with the ice?" I looked at my sister-in-law. I looked at the woman whose precious business was currently surviving on funds stolen directly from my life. I saw the absolute lack of remorse in her eyes. She viewed me as acceptable collateral damage, a convenient stepping stone for her brother's happiness and her own financial salvation. "No thank you, Vanessa," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "I have everything completely under control." She smiled her fake, brilliant smile and walked out to the patio to rejoin her admiring friends. I stood alone in the kitchen, gripping the handle of the ice bucket so tightly my knuckles turned white. The magnitude of the betrayal expanded far beyond Julian. It was not just an affair. It was not just a cheating husband making a foolish, selfish mistake. The entire family was complicit. They were a unified front of parasites. They sat at my dining table, ate the food I cooked, accepted the expensive gifts I bought, and smiled directly in my face, while actively participating in my financial execution. Clarice shamed me for not giving Julian a child, while knowing full well he was having one with his receptionist. Vanessa gladly accepted stolen money to fund her extravagant lifestyle and called me an idiot for trusting my own husband. Terrence knew the severe legal risks but chose cowardice over morality. They viewed me as an outsider, a gullible fool whose only purpose was to finance the grand illusion of their success. They thought they were completely untouchable because they had built a fortress of social standing and community respect. They believed their carefully crafted image would shield them from any consequence. They were entirely wrong. I did not just want Julian anymore. I wanted the entire bloodline. I wanted to tear down the facade of their perfect family and expose the rotting criminal core underneath. I wanted to see Clarice lose her precious social standing. I wanted to see Vanessa stripped of her boutique and publicly humiliated. I wanted Terrence to face the full crushing weight of his complicity. I walked back out to the patio carrying the ice bucket. The sun was shining, the gospel music was playing softly over the outdoor speakers, and Julian was holding court by the grill surrounded by admiring family members. I handed the ice to Clarice with a respectful nod. "Thank you, dear," she said dismissively, turning back to gossip with her friends. I stood on the edge of the manicured lawn and watched them all laugh together. The countdown in my head was ticking much louder now. 8 days left. 8 days until Julian thought he would board a plane to Mexico with $2 million. 8 days until Vanessa thought her boutique was permanently safe from bankruptcy. I pulled my phone from my purse and sent a highly encrypted message to Rochelle, my best friend from college and the most ruthless corporate litigator in Atlanta. I needed her specific set of skills for what I was about to do. I typed the message with rapid, precise keystrokes. "Emergency. Meet me at our secure spot tomorrow morning at 6. Bring your secure laptop. They are not just cheating, they are stealing." I hit send and slipped the phone back into my purse. I spent the rest of the afternoon playing my role flawlessly. I laughed at Julian's jokes, complimented Vanessa's outfit, and served Clarice her favorite dessert. I was the perfect, unassuming wife standing quietly in the shadows, meticulously preparing the gallows. Monday morning brought a torrential downpour to Atlanta, washing the city in a cold gray light. I arrived at the unlisted coffee shop exactly at 6. The cafe was hidden down a narrow alleyway in Decatur, a place completely off the radar of Julian and his high society friends. The interior was dark and smelled heavily of roasted beans and damp brick. I sat in a secluded booth near the back, nursing a black coffee. I did not have to wait long. Rochelle walked through the glass door precisely 2 minutes later. She shook the rain from her trench coat and scanned the room with the predatory gaze of a woman who destroyed arrogant men for a living. Rochelle and I had been best friends since our freshman year at Spelman College. While I had gone into forensic accounting to untangle corporate fraud, Rochelle had become one of the most ruthless and feared corporate defense attorneys in the state. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and completely without mercy. She slid into the booth across from me and placed her heavy leather briefcase on the table. "You look like you have not slept in 3 days," Rochelle said, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my face. "What did Julian do?" I did not waste time with tears or preamble. I pulled the encrypted flash drive from my purse and slid it across the wooden table. "He is having a child with his 24-year-old receptionist," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "He is moving to Cabo on Friday night. But that is not why I called you here. He is stealing $2 million from somewhere, wiring it to a private bank in Panama, and he funneled $300,000 of stolen capital to Vanessa to save her failing boutique." The entire family knows. They are actively helping him cover his tracks. Rochelle did not gasp. She did not offer empty sympathy. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure, absolute focus. She took the flash drive, opened her briefcase, and pulled out her secure, air-gapped laptop. She booted the machine, bypassed the security protocols, and plugged in the drive. "Show me," she commanded. For the next hour, the coffee shop faded into the background. We sat shoulder to shoulder, operating like a surgical team, dissecting a financial corpse. I walked her through the offshore routing numbers, the Shell Corporation paying for Elena's luxury condo, and the wire transfers directly linking Julian's fraudulent accounts to Vanessa's business ledger. Rochelle analyzed the documents with lethal efficiency, her eyes darting across the screen as she processed the magnitude of Julian's deception. "This is not just adultery, Chloe," Rochelle said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "This is a highly coordinated, multi-tiered federal wire fraud operation. Sending stolen funds across international borders to Panama carries massive prison time. And Vanessa accepting those funds to prop up her LLC makes her a direct accessory to money laundering. We have them completely dead to rights on the corporate side. But there is a glaring missing link here." Rochelle pointed to the primary escrow transfer document I had found on Julian's hidden drive. "You are right about the math," she continued. "Julian's commissions have been terrible this year. His firm is bleeding cash, and your joint accounts max out at $800,000. To wire $2 million to Panama, he had to secure a massive lump sum from a private lender. A hard money loan of this size requires an unencumbered, highly valuable physical asset as collateral. Julian does not own anything outright. Everything he has is leveraged." "That is exactly where I got stuck when he walked into the office," I replied, staring at the screen. "I need you to pull the county property deed records. He had to have used real estate. We just need to find out whose real estate he used." Rochelle nodded, minimizing the offshore banking files and opening a direct portal to the Georgia Public Property Registry. She ran a comprehensive search using Julian's name, his social security number, and the tax identification numbers of every Shell LLC we had just uncovered. We watched the loading icons spin on the screen. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. I tapped my fingers against the table, running through every possible commercial property he managed. The search results populated. Rochelle clicked on the most recent filing, a commercial loan origination dated just 3 weeks ago. The document loaded onto the screen. I leaned forward to read the property address. My heart stopped completely. The air was violently sucked from my lungs. The blood drained from my face so fast the room spun. It was not a commercial property. It was not one of his firm's real estate listings. The address listed on the collateral agreement was a historic, beautifully restored Victorian home in the Sweet Auburn district. It was my late grandmother's house. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking for the very first time since this nightmare began. "No, no, that is impossible. That house is solely in my name. It is fully paid off. He cannot legally touch it." Rochelle's face turned completely gray. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the signature pages of the loan agreement. She enlarged the final page and turned the screen toward me. Staring back at me was my own signature, perfectly executed on the bottom line of a $2 million hard money loan agreement. It was accompanied by a notary stamp belonging to Diego Morales. Julian did not just steal our savings. He had forged my signature to place a predatory high-interest mortgage against my grandmother's ancestral home. The physical reaction was instantaneous. A blinding, deafening rage erupted in my chest, burning through my veins like battery acid. That house was not just real estate. It was a sacred piece of generational wealth. My grandmother had worked her hands to the bone cleaning houses and taking on back-breaking labor just to afford the down payment in a time when Black women were routinely denied mortgages. She had poured her blood, her sweat, and her Afro-Cuban heritage into every single wooden floorboard and plaster wall of that property. When she passed away, she transferred the deed directly to me. I had stood by her hospital bed and sworn on my life that I would protect that house, that I would keep it in our family forever. Julian knew this. He knew the deep, irreplaceable spiritual value of that property. He knew it was my most prized possession, and he had violated it without a second thought. He had forged my name, handed the deed over to predatory lenders, and extracted the equity to fund a luxury getaway for his pregnant mistress and to bail out his sister's vanity boutique. "Rochelle, read the loan terms," her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer fury. "Chloe, this is a balloon loan. The interest rate is absolutely astronomical, because he took the cash as a lump sum payout. The first massive repayment installment is due in exactly 30 days. If that payment is missed, the bank has the automatic right to seize the property and begin immediate foreclosure proceedings." The reality of his master plan crashed down on me with terrifying clarity. Julian had engineered the perfect financial murder. When he boarded that flight to Cabo on Friday night, he was not just leaving me for another woman. He was leaving me holding a $2 million fraudulent debt. I knew I would not have the liquid cash to make the balloon payment because he was draining our joint accounts to zero. By the time I figured out what had happened, the bank would foreclose on my grandmother's house. I would be bankrupt, destitute, and stripped of my family's legacy, while he lived like a king on a Mexican beach. He was trying to erase me. He was actively trying to destroy my past, my present, and my future to finance his own selfish desires. The profound betrayal sliced through me, but it did not leave behind a wound. It left behind a hollow, icy void. The woman who had cried over his late nights at the office was dead. The wife who had endured his family's constant belittling was gone. Julian had crossed the ultimate red line. He had touched my bloodline. He had threatened my grandmother's legacy. Rochelle looked at me, her eyes flashing with a dangerous protective fire. "I am calling the federal authorities right now," she said, reaching for her phone. "I have friends in the district attorney's office. We can have him arrested for forgery and wire fraud before lunch. We can freeze his assets and stop the Panama transfer. We will file for divorce this afternoon and burn his name to the ground in court." I reached across the table and placed my hand firmly over her phone, pushing it back down against the wooden surface. "No," I commanded, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Rochelle stared at me, bewildered. "Chloe, if he leaves on Friday, you lose everything. You will be $2 million in debt. They will take your grandmother's house. We have to strike now." I looked at the forged signature on the laptop screen. I thought about Clarice publicly shaming my body at the cookout. I thought about Vanessa gladly spending my stolen inheritance to buy designer shoes. I thought about Terrence hiding in the pantry, complicit in my financial execution. And I thought about Julian confidently packing his bags for a new life, completely certain that I was a naive, obedient idiot. "If we arrest him now," I explained coldly, "he gets to play the victim. He will hire high-priced defense lawyers. He will drag this out in court for years. Vanessa will hide the money she took, and Clarice will rally the church to his defense, painting me as the vindictive wife trying to ruin a successful black man. They will fight me in the shadows, and they will try to bury me with legal fees. I am not going to give them the privilege of a private downfall." Rochelle slowly pulled her hand away from her phone. Her lips curved into a sharp, predatory smile. She recognized the look in my eyes. She knew exactly what I was becoming. "What is the play, Chloe?" she asked softly. I leaned back in the booth, crossing my arms. My mind was already running 1,000 calculations a second, building a flawless, airtight matrix of financial and legal destruction. "We are not stopping the Panama transfer," I said. "We are going to let him initiate it. We are going to let him think he won. But we are going to use my Spanish, my credentials, and your legal authority to intercept the routing destination. We are going to ensure that the moment the money leaves American soil, it triggers a catastrophic international freeze. We are going to tie the debt directly to Vanessa's boutique. We are going to sever my name from that forged deed." I picked up my black coffee and took a slow, deliberate sip. The caffeine tasted like ash, but I relished the bitterness. "Julian wants to celebrate his new life on Friday night," I continued. "I am going to throw him a massive birthday party at Vanessa's restaurant. I am going to invite the entire family, all the church elders, and every prominent investor he knows. I am going to let him stand on a stage and give a toast to his own brilliance." Rochelle's eyes gleamed with dark anticipation. And then I said, setting my coffee cup down with a sharp, definitive clack against the saucer, "I am going to execute him in front of everyone he has ever tried to impress." I looked out the cafe window at the driving rain, feeling an absolute, unbreakable sense of purpose settling into my bones. "We aren't filing for divorce, Rochelle," I stated, my voice echoing with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "We are filing for their destruction." The rain had stopped by the time I pulled my car into the pristine driveway of our Cascade estate. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment watching the droplets slide down the windshield. I practiced my breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. I needed to lower my heart rate. I needed to wash the predatory gleam out of my eyes and replace it with the soft, adoring gaze of a woman who believed her husband was the greatest man on earth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was flawless. My expression was serene. The transition was complete. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the grand foyer. Julian was in the kitchen dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp white button-down shirt. He was pouring himself a glass of expensive bourbon, looking completely relaxed and thoroughly satisfied with himself. He turned when he heard my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. His smile was immediate, bright, and entirely hollow. "There is my beautiful wife," Julian said, walking over to kiss my cheek. "Where have you been hiding all morning?" "Just grabbing coffee with Rochelle." I lied smoothly, leaning into his chest and wrapping my arms around his waist. "You know how she gets when she is stressed about a big corporate case. She just needed to vent." Julian chuckled, a dismissive sound that vibrated against my ear. He ran a hand down my back. "Rochelle works too hard. She needs to find a good man to take care of her so she can relax. You should give her some pointers on how to build a happy home." I smiled against his shirt. "I will be sure to share all of our secrets with her, darling." He stepped back and took a sip of his bourbon. "Actually, speaking of working hard, I need to talk to you about this weekend. An incredible opportunity just landed on my desk." I looked at him, widening my eyes in perfect manufactured innocence. "Oh, what kind of opportunity?" "A group of major investors from Miami wants to put together a massive commercial portfolio." Julian explained, his voice taking on that authoritative business pitch tone he loved to use. "They are flying in this weekend, and they want me to take them down to a private golf resort in Florida to iron out the details. It is a highly exclusive trip. Diego is going to be there, along with some heavy hitters in the real estate game. We leave Friday evening." He watched my face closely, waiting for my reaction. Friday was my birthday. He knew this. He was testing my compliance, evaluating whether I would throw a fit or quietly accept my place on the sidelines. I let my shoulders drop slightly. I allowed a fleeting look of disappointment to cross my features before quickly replacing it with an understanding, supportive smile. Friday evening. "But Julian, Friday is my birthday. We were supposed to go out for a quiet dinner." Julian stepped forward and took my hands in his. "I know, baby, I know. And it kills me to ask this of you. But this deal could double our firm's revenue for the year. This is the kind of generational wealth building we always talk about. I promise I will make it up to you the second I get back. We can do a whole spa weekend, just you and me." I was lying straight to my face. There was no spa weekend. There was no return flight. He was already finalizing the private jet to Cabo with his pregnant mistress. The sheer audacity of his performance was almost impressive. I looked down at our joined hands, playing the role of the dutiful, sacrificial wife. "I understand, Julian. You are building our future. I would never stand in the way of your success." Relief washed over his face. He kissed my hands, his ego fully inflated by my complete submission. "You are the best wife a man could ask for, Chloe, truly." I looked up at him, my eyes shining with manufactured adoration. "But since you are leaving on Friday evening," I proposed softly, "why do we not do something even better than a quiet dinner? Why do we not celebrate your upcoming success and my birthday at the exact same time?" Julian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "We should host a massive early dinner on Friday evening," I said, my voice bubbling with fake excitement. "Right before you have to leave for the airport. We can rent out the main dining room at Vanessa's restaurant. We can invite your mother, Terrence, the church elders, and all the prominent investors in your circle. You are on the verge of a massive career milestone. You deserve to be celebrated in front of the entire community. You deserve to have everyone see the empire you are building." I watched the hook sink deep into his flesh. Julian was a narcissist of the highest order. The idea of standing in a room full of Atlanta's black elite, receiving their praise and admiration, right before pulling off the ultimate financial heist, was a temptation he simply could not resist. It was the perfect alibi. Who would ever suspect a man of planning to abandon his wife and steal $2 million on the very same night he hosted a lavish, highly public birthday party in her honor? A slow, arrogant smile spread across his handsome face. That is actually a brilliant idea, Chloe. It sends the perfect message to the community, a strong, united front. And it will be a wonderful way to celebrate you before I have to catch my flight. I beamed at him, my heart perfectly steady. I will handle all the arrangements. I will call Vanessa right now and secure the VIP dining room. Julian finished his bourbon looking thoroughly pleased with himself. Invite Diego too, he said casually. If he is going to be part of this golf trip, it would be good to show him how respected I am in my own city. Let him see how we operate in Atlanta. I nodded enthusiastically. Of course, Diego must be there. I want everyone to be present. Julian kissed me one last time before heading upstairs to his home gym. I stood in the kitchen alone, wiping the spot on my cheek where his lips had touched. I walked over to the marble island, picked up my phone, and dialed Vanessa's number. Vanessa's restaurant, the Velvet Magnolia, was a staple of the Atlanta elite. It was draped in rich purple hues, velvet seating, and gold accents. It was the exact kind of pretentious establishment that Julian and his family believed they deserved. I made sure to order the most expensive items on the menu: dry-aged ribeye, lobster tail, imported champagne. I wanted Julian to run up a massive bill on his corporate card, a card that would soon be frozen by federal investigators. I wanted Vanessa to taste the phantom profits before everything was seized by the IRS. Vanessa answered on the second ring. The background noise of her struggling boutique echoed through the receiver. Chloe, she answered, her tone dripping with that familiar, thinly veiled condescension. What do you need? I am incredibly busy managing inventory today. Vanessa, I am so glad I caught you, I said, matching her fake sweetness note for note. Julian and I want to host a massive dinner this Friday evening at your restaurant. We want to rent out the entire VIP dining hall. We are inviting the church elders, the city councilman Julian plays tennis with, and several out-of-town investors. It is a dual celebration for my birthday and Julian's new business venture. The condescension in Vanessa's voice vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, eager sound of pure greed. A full VIP buyout for Friday night. Chloe, you know that requires a premium deposit. We usually need weeks of notice for a party of that caliber. I know, I replied smoothly. But Julian insisted. He said he wants to support his sister's business and show off your spectacular restaurant to his new partners. We are perfectly fine paying the premium rush fee and an automatic 20% gratuity for the entire staff. Just put the final invoice on Julian's corporate card. Vanessa practically purred into the phone. The prospect of a massive guaranteed payout for her restaurant, especially when she believed she was already being funded by my stolen money, made her entirely compliant. Well, since it is for my brother's big success, I will personally ensure the chef creates a custom menu. We will make it a night to remember, Chloe. You have my word. Thank you, Vanessa. I truly appreciate your dedication to this family. We want Friday night to be absolutely unforgettable. On Thursday morning, while Julian was at the brokerage firm supposedly finalizing his deals, I met with Rochelle one last time. We sat in her high-rise office overlooking the city skyline. Rochelle handed me a thick sealed manila envelope. The wire transfer is fully monitored, Rochelle confirmed, her eyes sharp and predatory. The moment Julian's bank attempts to push the $2 million to the Panama routing numbers tomorrow evening, my contacts at the Federal Fraud Division will trigger the hard freeze. The money will not leave the country. Furthermore, the deed to your grandmother's ancestral home has been successfully transferred into the irrevocable blind trust. The fraudulent mortgage liability is now legally isolated and pointed directly at Julian's personal assets and Vanessa's corporate LLC. I took the envelope, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute justice. I asked Rochelle if the police presence was coordinated. Everything is timed to the exact minute, she assured me. The fraud warrants are signed by a judge who absolutely despises white-collar criminals. The authorities will wait for my signal. You just make sure he is standing in the center of the room when the hammer falls. I left Rochelle's office feeling an overwhelming sense of calm. The frantic, terrified energy that had gripped me when I first discovered the forged signature was entirely gone. I was in complete control. Later that afternoon, Julian sent out the digital invitations. He spent hours on his phone calling business associates and church leaders, making sure every important figure in his network would be in attendance. I listened from the home office as he bragged to a senior deacon about his upcoming deals, seamlessly blending his lies with his religious charm. I was putting all his supporters in one room. He was building the very audience that would witness his complete destruction. When Diego called him back to confirm his attendance, I stood quietly in the hallway listening to Julian switch effortlessly to Spanish. Yes, my friend, Julian laughed into the phone. The naive wife wants to throw a party to celebrate me. It is perfect. We eat, we drink, we play the happy family for the church crowd. Then the wire transfer clears, I grab my bags, and we head to the private airstrip. Elena is already packing the nursery items. I did not flinch. I did not react. I simply walked into the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Over the next 2 days, the illusion of our perfect marriage reached a fever pitch. Julian bought me a massive bouquet of red roses. He left a sweet handwritten note on the kitchen counter, thanking me for being the backbone of his success. He played the devoted husband with terrifying authenticity. He was a sociopath completely devoid of empathy, capable of kissing my cheek while actively signing the paperwork to destroy my grandmother's legacy. But I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of his demise. I smiled at his roses. I thanked him for the note. I cooked his favorite meals and listened to him talk about his fictional golf trip with unwavering support. I became the perfect mirror reflecting exactly what he wanted to see, hiding the executioner standing right behind the glass. Friday was approaching rapidly. The trap was fully set. The venue was booked, the guests were confirmed, and the targets were completely unaware of the snare wrapping tightly around their ankles. They were marching eagerly, happily, blindly into the slaughterhouse, completely convinced they were the ones holding the knife. To ensure that the Friday night execution went off without a single hitch, the financial trap had to be set perfectly in advance. That mechanism was triggered on Wednesday afternoon, while Julian was out at what he claimed was an extended client lunch. I knew he was actually touring luxury baby boutiques in Buckhead with Elena, spending stolen money on designer cribs and imported strollers. I let him enjoy his shopping spree. I had my own errands to run. I drove my car to a massive crowded electronics store in a generic strip mall 2 towns over from our quiet upscale neighborhood. I wore a plain baseball cap and oversized sunglasses, blending seamlessly into the midday rush of shoppers. I walked straight to the prepaid mobile aisle and paid cash for a cheap disposable smartphone and a heavy-duty mobile network router. I needed a device completely unattached to any local wireless networks that Julian or his tech-savvy friends might have the ability to monitor. I left the store and drove until I found a massive anonymous parking lot behind a public library. The torrential rain from earlier in the week had returned, leaving the pavement slick and the air thick with gray, oppressive humidity. I parked my car in the furthest corner, turned off the engine, and sat in the heavy silence of the vehicle. I booted up the burner phone. Drawing on years of forensic accounting experience, I installed a military-grade virtual private network. I routed my digital footprint through secure proxy servers in Zurich, bounced the signal through a secure hub in Singapore, and finally dropped my location pin directly into the bustling financial district of Miami. If any security analyst attempted to trace the origin of my upcoming phone call, they would find themselves chasing digital ghosts across the globe. I took a slow, deep breath, slipping entirely out of the persona of Chloe, the supportive wife, and stepping fully into the role of a ruthless federal compliance officer. I pulled up the encrypted files on my secure tablet. The screen illuminated the dark interior of my car, displaying every single routing number, account detail, and shell corporation name Julian had foolishly stored on his hidden hard drive. I memorized the exact sequence of numbers. This was the moment of supreme poetic justice. Julian had mocked my Afro-Cuban heritage. He had dismissed my grandmother as a woman who did not fit his elite, highly curated Atlanta image. He had forced me to bury my fluency in her language because it did not serve his social climbing agenda. Now that exact language was going to be the weapon that dismantled his entire commercial empire. I channeled the fierce, unbreakable spirit of my grandmother. I felt her strength fortifying my spine. I dialed the international number for the private banking institution, located in Panama City. A polished automated voice greeted me in Spanish. offering a numerical menu for various services. Julian and Diego had undoubtedly utilized the bank's English-speaking concierge brokers to set up their illicit accounts. Those brokers were highly paid to look the other way, expedite large transfers for wealthy American clients, and ask absolutely zero questions about the source of the capital. I bypassed that entire corrupt division. I punched in the specific keypad combination that directed my call straight to the Internal Fraud and International Compliance Department. A man answered after the fourth ring. His voice was sharp, strictly professional, and entirely in Spanish. He identified himself as Mateo, a senior compliance agent for the institution. I did not miss a single beat. In flawless rapid-fire Spanish rolling my consonants with the exact authoritative cadence my grandmother had taught me, I introduced myself. I stated that I was an anonymous internal investigator, calling on behalf of a partner compliance agency stateside. I projected an aura of absolute terrifying authority. I spoke with the icy precision of a woman who held the power to freeze global assets with a single keystroke. I told Mateo that his prestigious institution was about to be implicated in a massive multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud investigation originating from the United States. I heard the sudden sharp shift in his breathing over the line. Private offshore banks thrive on absolute secrecy and discretion, but they absolutely despise attracting the attention of American federal authorities. The mere threat of an international money laundering probe is enough to make any seasoned compliance officer sweat through his tailored suit. Mateo attempted to maintain his professional distance, asking for my specific agency identification numbers. I smoothly sidestepped the trap, reminding him in stern Spanish that this was a courtesy warning regarding an active classified sting operation. I told him I was giving his bank the rare opportunity to protect their own liabilities before the federal subpoenas were issued on Monday morning. That got his undivided attention. He asked for the target accounts. I fed him the exact account numbers. I listed the names of Julian's shell corporations, spelling out the acronyms with surgical precision so there could be zero misunderstandings. I gave him the specific routing codes for the $2 million transfer scheduled to hit their ledgers on Friday evening. I could hear Mateo typing frantically on his mechanical keyboard, the clacking keys echoing sharply through the receiver as he pulled up the hidden ledgers. I did not stop there. The trap needed to be airtight. I explained to the compliance officer that the incoming capital was not legitimate commercial real estate revenue as the account holder claimed. I detailed exactly how the funds were generated through the fraudulent predatory leveraging of a stolen residential property deed. I explicitly stated that the signature on the primary collateral document had been viciously forged and that the transaction was currently being flagged by local fraud divisions in the state of Georgia. To cement the financial snare, I threw Diego Morales directly into the fire. I gave Mateo Diego's full legal name and his Miami operating license number. I explained that Diego was an active co-conspirator facilitating the laundering of these stolen funds across international borders. Private banks in Panama maintain extensive, highly sensitive internal watch lists. Associating a pending high-value transfer with a known shady broker like Diego instantly elevated the risk profile from suspicious to absolutely critical. Mateo's voice lost all its polite customer service polish. He spoke with the rigid, urgent tone of a man desperately trying to save his own job and protect his institution from a catastrophic federal raid. He asked for the exact timestamp of the incoming wire transfer. I gave it to him without hesitation. Friday, 5 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Standard Time. Mateo confirmed that the account details and the Shell Corporation names matched his internal records perfectly. He asked me to remain on the line while he escalated the file to his department director. He placed me on a brief hold. Soft generic classical music began to play through the tinny speaker of my burner phone. I sat in my car staring out at the gray weeping sky. My heart was beating with slow, powerful, triumphant thuds. The silence on the line was the sound of a financial guillotine being cranked high into position, waiting for the perfect moment to drop. The seconds ticked by, stretching into minutes. I envisioned Julian laughing with Elena in some high-end boutique, swiping his credit card, completely oblivious to the massive structural collapse occurring beneath his feet. 3 agonizing minutes later, the music stopped. Mateo returned to the line. He informed me, speaking in highly formal, cautious Spanish, that the institution's automated clearinghouse protocols had been manually overridden by their legal department. He stated clearly that the incoming $2 million transfer from the American accounts had been preemptively flagged with a critical security hold. The moment Julian's local bank pushed the money on Friday evening, the Panamanian receiving accounts would immediately enter a hard freeze state. The funds would be completely trapped in a digital purgatory. The money would be completely inaccessible, unable to be withdrawn, transferred, or even returned to the sender until a full comprehensive international money laundering investigation was concluded by their internal auditors. The trap had snapped completely shut. Mateo asked for my direct contact information so their legal team could follow up with my agency. I responded in smooth, commanding Spanish that my agency would be issuing formal binding subpoenas by Monday morning, and that the bank's proactive cooperation today would be heavily noted in our federal filings. I advised him to keep the accounts open just long enough to catch the wire, ensuring the criminals could not redirect the funds to a different offshore haven at the last minute. Mateo agreed, thanking me profusely for the advanced intelligence. I ended the call. I sat in the dim light of my car and let out a long, shuddering breath. A cold, fierce smile spread across my face. I popped the back cover off the burner phone and removed the tiny plastic SIM card. I snapped the card cleanly in half, rendering it entirely useless. I stepped out of my car into the pouring rain, walked over to a heavy iron storm drain at the edge of the library parking lot, and dropped the broken pieces down into the rushing, muddy water below. I tossed the burner phone into a nearby commercial dumpster for good measure. Julian was currently sitting in his plush office or dining at some expensive restaurant, picking out tailored linen shirts for his Mexican getaway. I was completely oblivious to the fact that his financial lifeblood had just been severed with surgical precision. He would not receive a single warning notification from his local Atlanta bank because the transfer would appear to go through successfully on his end. The money would leave our joint accounts right on schedule. He would see a zero balance and assume he had achieved total victory. He would smile, pack his bags, and head to Vanessa's restaurant to celebrate his brilliant escape. He would not realize the money was locked in an impenetrable offshore vault until he landed in Cabo, tried to access the funds to pay for his luxury beachfront villa, and found his digital wallet completely irrevocably empty. He would be stranded in a foreign country with a pregnant mistress and absolutely zero access to capital. I climbed back into my car, soaking wet, but feeling more alive than I had in a decade. The Panamanian strike was a flawless success. The money was trapped. The ancestral home was secured. The liability was shifted. All that remained was the final, devastating performance. I started the engine, turned on the radio, and drove back to my pristine suburban fortress to cook dinner for a dead man walking. Thursday morning broke with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes Atlanta feel like a sauna. I stood in my massive chef's kitchen, flipping perfectly golden pancakes and listening to Julian whistle an upbeat tune as he came down the grand staircase. He walked into the kitchen smelling of expensive cologne and misplaced confidence. He kissed my cheek, grabbed a pancake straight from the platter, and thanked me for being the best wife a man could ask for. He was utterly convinced his escape plan was functioning flawlessly. I smiled, handed him a cup of black coffee, and told him to have a wonderful day at the office. The moment his sports car pulled out of our long driveway, I dropped the domestic facade. I threw the remaining pancakes into the garbage, grabbed my tailored blazer, and drove straight downtown to Rochelle's law firm. We had less than 36 hours until Julian's scheduled flight to Cabo. The financial intercept in Panama was secured, but the defensive legal perimeter back home still required absolute airtight reinforcement. I took the private elevator up to the top floor of Rochelle's firm. She was waiting for me in her expansive corner office, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and legal briefs. Her large mahogany desk was cleared of everything except the documents pertaining to my survival. Rochelle looked up as I entered, her expression a mask of pure corporate warfare. She pushed a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "We begin with the defensive strike," she stated, tapping a manicured fingernail against the top file. "Julian forged your signature to leverage your grandmother's ancestral home in the Sweet Auburn district. If we simply wait for him to default on the balloon payment, the lenders will initiate aggressive foreclosure proceedings. We have to sever the fraudulent mortgage from the actual property deed before the banking algorithms detect the missed payments. I sat down across from her, picking up a heavy silver pen. How do we execute the separation without alerting Julian or the lenders too early? Rochelle handed me a separate, highly classified folder. This is an expedited fraud report. I called in a massive favor with a senior detective I know at the local financial crimes division. He owes me his career. We are filing a quiet, targeted police report today regarding the forged signature and the fraudulent commercial loan origination. I have already provided the detective with your verified signature samples and the digital timestamps from Julian's hidden hard drive, showing exactly when and where he manufactured the fake documents. I reviewed the police report. It detailed the exact nature of the $2 million theft, highlighting Diego Morales' illegitimate notary stamp. Will this trigger an immediate arrest warrant? I asked, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. If the police pull Julian out of his office today, he will have time to call his high-priced defense team and spin a narrative. He needs to fall from the highest possible height tomorrow night. Rochelle smiled, a dangerous, calculating expression. I anticipated that. The detective is placing the warrant in a holding pattern. The fraud report is officially on the books as of 10 o'clock this morning, which legally protects your liability. But the active arrest warrant will not be executed until I give the absolute green light on Friday evening. The police are perfectly happy to let Julian walk right into a crowded room before they slap the cuffs on him. They want Diego too, and they know Friday night is the only time both targets will be in the same room. I signed the expedited fraud report, pressing the pen down so hard it nearly tore the heavy stock paper. The first layer of armor was officially forged. I pushed the document back to Rochelle. What is the next phase? Rochelle pulled out a second, much thicker stack of legal binders. We locked down the fortress, she said, because we have formally declared the mortgage fraudulent with the authorities. The predatory loan is now legally categorized as a criminal liability, not a legitimate property lien. This gives me the narrow legal window I need to shift the actual deed of the home. I have drawn up the paperwork to transfer your grandmother's property into an untouchable, irrevocable blind trust. I looked at the trust documents. My grandmother had spent her entire life scrubbing floors and enduring unimaginable hardships to secure that piece of land. It was a symbol of our bloodline's resilience. Julian had treated it like a cheap poker chip. By moving the deed into an irrevocable blind trust, Rochelle explained, her voice steady and commanding. We completely remove the asset from your personal financial portfolio. You will remain the sole managing beneficiary, but on paper, the house will belong to a sovereign legal entity. The predatory lenders cannot place a lien on a blind trust for a debt incurred under a fraudulent signature by a third party. Julian's fake mortgage will bounce right off the trust's legal armor like a broken arrow. The house is completely untouchable. It will remain in your family for generations to come, exactly as your grandmother intended. A profound, overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. The sickening anxiety that had gripped my throat since discovering the forged mortgage finally dissolved. I signed the transfer documents, legally relinquishing my direct ownership and placing the ancestral home inside the impenetrable vault of the blind trust. The legacy was secure. Julian could rot in a federal cell, but he would never take a single brick of my grandmother's house. Now Rochelle said, her eyes gleaming with dark anticipation, we move on to the offensive strike, the domino effect. We need to handle Vanessa and Terrence. I leaned forward, my heart beating with renewed predatory focus. Vanessa had gladly accepted $300,000 of stolen funds to bail out her failing high-end boutique. She and Terrence had mocked me in the kitchen, declaring that my feelings were acceptable collateral damage for their family's image and financial salvation. They thought they were untouchable because Julian was the one executing the primary fraud. They were completely mistaken. Rochelle pulled up a digital schematic on her large wall monitor. It displayed the intricate web of wire transfers linking Julian's shell corporation directly to the corporate bank accounts of Vanessa's boutique. In the eyes of federal financial law, Rochelle lectured, tracing the glowing red lines connecting the accounts. Ignorance is absolutely not an acceptable defense when receiving stolen capital. But we have something even better than ignorance. We have the audio recording you captured on Sunday at the cookout. We have Terrence explicitly stating that the money is dirty, and Vanessa explicitly acknowledging the cover-up. They are knowing, willing participants in the distribution of fraudulently obtained assets. I nodded, remembering the sheer venom in Vanessa's voice when she called me an idiot. How do we chain the debt to them? Through a beautiful legal mechanism called fraudulent conveyance and joint and several liability. Rochelle explained, her fingers typing rapidly on her keyboard. Julian secured a $2 million loan. He wired $300,000 directly into the operating accounts of Vanessa's boutique. Because I am currently submitting the fraud report, declaring Julian's primary loan invalid, the predatory lenders will be legally authorized to aggressively pursue anyone who received the dispersed funds. Rochelle hit a final key, printing out a heavy stack of civil liability motions. I am officially filing a legal motion of attachment, tying the $300,000 debt directly to Vanessa's corporate LLC. But I am not stopping there. Vanessa structured her boutique as a standard limited liability company, thinking it would protect her personal assets. However, because she knowingly accepted stolen funds to prop up the business, she has committed an act of financial malfeasance. That allows me to legally pierce the corporate veil. I smiled truly and deeply for the first time all week. Piercing the corporate veil meant that the legal protections of the business entity were entirely stripped away. Exactly, Rochelle said, reading my expression. I am directly attaching the debt liability to Vanessa and Terrence's personal bank accounts, their investment portfolios, and the equity in their primary residence. When the federal authorities freeze Julian's accounts on Friday night, the predatory lenders will instantly realize they have been defrauded. They will unleash a swarm of aggressive collection attorneys. Because Julian will be sitting in federal prison with zero accessible capital, the lenders will hunt down the dispersed funds. They will go straight for Vanessa. The sheer brilliance of the trap was breathtaking. Vanessa and Terrence wanted to play the roles of wealthy elite socialites. They wanted to sneer at me while funding their extravagant lifestyle with my stolen equity. Now they were going to be the primary bag holders for a massive aggressive corporate debt. The moment the lenders realize Vanessa holds $300,000 of the stolen collateral, they will freeze her boutique's operating accounts. Rochelle continued, outlining the impending destruction with cold satisfaction. The IRS will be automatically notified of the untaxed fraudulent transfer. Vanessa will be unable to make payroll. Her suppliers will cut her off. Her store will collapse within days. And because I pierced the corporate veil, the lenders will place heavy liens on her personal vehicles and her home. She and Terrence will be dragged into a brutal multi-year bankruptcy proceeding. They wanted to protect their precious family image, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet office. They are going to lose everything they value. They are going to be stripped of their wealth, their boutique, and their standing in the church. They gladly climbed aboard Julian's sinking ship. Rochelle agreed, neatly stacking the liability motions into a final heavy binder. I am just chaining them securely to the anchor. By the time they realize they are drowning, the water will already be over their heads. I stood up from the mahogany desk, the heavy weight of the legal maneuvers settling comfortably onto my shoulders. The defense was flawless. The ancestral home was locked in an impenetrable vault. The liability was successfully redirected to the conspirators. The Panamanian wire transfer was a ticking time bomb waiting to freeze Julian's escape funds. Every single piece of the execution matrix was armed and primed. I looked at Rochelle. The loyalty and brilliance of my best friend had just saved my life and guaranteed the total annihilation of my enemies. Thank you, Rochelle, for everything. Rochelle stood and pulled me into a fierce, unwavering embrace. You do not ever have to thank me for protecting you, Chloe. We are sisters. Now go home. Go pick out the most stunning, powerful dress you own. Get your hair done. Practice your Spanish. Tomorrow night we drop the hammer, and we do not stop swinging until there is nothing left but dust. I left the law firm and stepped back out into the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. The gray clouds from earlier in the week were finally breaking, allowing bright, piercing beams of sunlight to strike the pavement. I walked to my car with the posture of a queen returning to claim her throne. I had exactly 30 hours left to play the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. 30 hours until the grand luxurious birthday dinner at Vanessa's upscale restaurant. 30 hours until Julian took the microphone to toast his own fabricated brilliance. I was going to give him the greatest performance of my life, and then I was going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. Thursday evening descended upon our Cascade estate with an agonizingly slow, suffocating heat that made the very air inside the house feel thick and unbreathable. The final 24 hours before the execution felt like walking through a deep, dark body of water. Every tick of the antique grandfather clock standing in the grand foyer echoed like a wooden gavel striking a sounding block, counting down the seconds to complete annihilation. The tension inside our home was an invisible, crushing weight. It was a pressure cooker set to maximum capacity, screaming silently under the polished, perfect surface of our domestic bliss. I moved quietly through the pristine rooms of my home, committing every single detail to memory. The expensive modern art hanging on the freshly painted walls, the custom silk drapes framing the large bay windows, the plush rugs my feet sank into. I knew with absolute unshakable certainty that this would be the very last night I would ever spend under this roof with this man. The illusion was in its final, incredibly fragile hours. I watched the golden hour light filter through the plantation shutters, casting long, fractured shadows across the imported Brazilian hardwood floors, mirroring the shattered reality of my marriage. Down the hall, the heavy oak door to the master bedroom stood wide open. Julian was humming a cheerful, upbeat jazz melody, the sound grating against my ears as I stood just outside the doorframe, hidden in the shadows of the corridor. I was eagerly preparing for his monumental betrayal. A large, incredibly expensive leather duffel bag sat wide open in the center of our king-sized mattress. He had told me earlier that morning he was packing his golf bag for a mandatory weekend corporate retreat with the high-rolling Miami investors. I leaned against the doorjamb, crossing my arms over my chest, and watched him work. There were no golf shirts, no spiked cleats, no golf gloves, and no moisture-wicking athletic gear going into that leather bag. Instead, Julian was meticulously folding lightweight, breathable linen pants, brightly colored silk resort shirts, and high-end designer swim trunks. He carefully placed a bottle of premium tanning oil into a zippered side compartment, followed by a brand new pair of expensive polarized sunglasses he had just purchased. He was packing his wardrobe for the pristine beaches of Cabo San Lucas. I was packing for a romantic sun-drenched getaway with a 24-year-old pregnant woman, and it was all being financed by the blood, sweat, and stolen equity of my ancestors. I watched as he paused his packing, glancing over his shoulder toward the door to ensure I was not watching him. Satisfied he was alone, he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket draped over a chair. He pulled out 2 navy blue United States passports and slipped them deep into a hidden zippered pocket at the very bottom of the duffel bag. 2 passports, one for him and one for Elena. He patted the hidden pocket flat, a sickeningly smug, arrogant smile spreading across his handsome face. His smartphone resting face up on the mahogany nightstand lit up brightly with a continuous stream of incoming text messages. I did not need to run my forensic software to know it was Elena on the other end, eagerly coordinating their midnight escape. Julian picked up the device, his thumbs flying rapidly across the glass screen, a soft, genuine laugh escaping his lips. He was completely intoxicated by his own deception. He truly believed he was a master illusionist, a genius seamlessly juggling a devoted, clueless wife, an adoring young mistress, and a multi-million-dollar heist, without dropping a single ball. I turned away from the bedroom doorway and walked silently into my massive walk-in dressing room. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me, engaging the brass lock with a soft, definitive click. It was time to pack my own bags for the weekend. I did not need breathable linen shirts or expensive tanning oil. I needed heavy ammunition. I placed my black, highly structured designer handbag onto the velvet ottoman sitting in the center of the room. It was a beautiful, elegant accessory, the exact kind of bag a supportive, wealthy wife would carry to a high-society birthday dinner at a prominent restaurant. I opened the heavy gold clasp. First, I reached into my pocket and retrieved the encrypted USB drive. I placed the small metallic rectangle into the secure pocket of the handbag. That drive contained the high-resolution digital scans of the forged mortgage deeds, the Panamanian bank wire transfer receipts, the offshore routing codes, and Elena's prenatal medical bills paid directly from Julian's corporate accounts. It also held the audio recording of Vanessa and Terrence explicitly admitting their complicity. It was a digital bomb perfectly assembled and waiting to be detonated in front of his entire network. Next, I folded a thick, heavy stack of legal documents printed on official watermarked paper. These were the certified stamped copies of the expedited fraud reports filed with the Atlanta Police Department. Alongside them was the stamped irrevocable blind trust transfer, legally shielding my grandmother's ancestral home, and the complex civil liability motions piercing the corporate veil, effectively connecting the stolen $300,000 directly to Vanessa and Terrence's personal bank accounts. I slid the dense stack of legal papers into a hidden sleeve at the very back of the designer handbag. Finally, I pulled a small black wireless microphone receiver from my vanity drawer. Rochelle had procured the specialized high-tech device from a private investigator she frequently kept on retainer. The receiver was already perfectly synced to the primary audio and visual system in the VIP dining hall of Vanessa's restaurant. All I had to do was plug it into the soundboard behind the podium, and every single word I spoke, every damning image loaded onto my USB drive would be broadcasted with crystal clear precision to the entire room. I nestled the receiver right next to the legal documents, checking the contents one last time before snapping the gold clasp of the handbag shut. My arsenal was fully loaded, packed with lethal, undeniable truth. I unlocked the dressing room door and walked casually back into the master bedroom, just as Julian was zipping up his leather duffel bag. He turned to me, clapping his hands together with a sudden burst of manufactured nervous energy. All packed and ready to conquer the Florida greens, he declared, picking up the heavy bag and setting it by the bedroom door. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, placing his large, warm hands firmly on my shoulders. I looked up into his eyes, forcing my facial muscles to relax entirely, morphing my features into an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. I was giving the performance of a lifetime. Julian leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss against my forehead. "I am really going to miss you this weekend, baby," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "I wish I could be here to celebrate your actual birthday properly. But do not worry at all. As soon as I get back from closing this massive commercial deal, I am taking you straight to the jewelry store. I am going to buy you a special gift to make up for missing the day. A beautiful, flawless diamond necklace, exactly the one you have been eyeing in the window downtown." I smiled up at him, my eyes shining with fake gratitude and love. "That sounds absolutely perfect, Julian. I cannot wait for you to get back so we can celebrate your big success together." As he spoke those extravagant lies, I watched his face with the hyper-focused analytical scrutiny of a seasoned forensic auditor. I noticed the tiny involuntary micro-expressions he simply could not control. I saw the way his jaw tensed ever so slightly, the muscles ticking just beneath his dark skin as he formulated the deception. I noted the way he broke eye contact a fraction of a second too early, looking past my shoulder instead of directly into my soul. His breathing was just a fraction too shallow. He was a highly practiced, confident liar, but his body language betrayed the immense, suffocating pressure of his impending betrayal. I thought he was offering me a comforting fantasy to keep me docile and compliant while he finalized his escape. He thought his empty words were soothing me into complete submission, standing there wrapped in the arms of the man who had promised to love, honor, and protect me for the rest of his life. I searched the deepest corners of my heart for even a single drop of sorrow. I waited for the familiar agonizing sting of heartbreak, the crushing grief of a 10-year relationship turning violently to ash. But there was absolutely nothing. The emotional center of my chest was a barren, frozen wasteland. The love I once harbored for him had been surgically excised, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness. I felt no heartbreak, no mourning for the life we built, no regret for what I was about to do to him and his entire family. I felt only the cold, sharp anticipation of an apex predator, standing perfectly still in the tall grass, watching its ignorant prey step willingly into an inescapable snare. I was a hunter, and the scent of blood was already heavy in the water, The trap was set, the documents were secured, the audience was invited. Tomorrow night the curtain would rise and this hunt would officially end forever. Friday evening arrived with a breathtaking sunset that bathed the city of Atlanta in hues of deep violet and spun gold. The Velvet Magnolia, Vanessa's supposedly exclusive restaurant in Midtown, was completely transformed for the occasion. Valets in crisp black uniforms rushed down the brick-paved driveway to open the doors of imported luxury sedans and sleek sports cars. Inside, the massive VIP dining hall was a masterclass in performative wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over tables draped in heavy lavender linens. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, dry-aged steaks, and freshly cut orchids. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, providing the perfect soundtrack for high society deception. I walked through the double doors wearing a stunning floor-length crimson gown that hugged every curve of my body. I looked like a woman celebrating a milestone birthday, a woman deeply in love with her successful husband. I carried my structured designer handbag, feeling the heavy, comforting weight of the legal documents and the wireless microphone receiver hidden safely inside. The restaurant staff buzzed around us, serving imported caviar and pouring glasses of champagne that cost hundreds of dollars a bottle. Every single expense tonight was being charged to Julian's corporate account, an account that was only hours away from being permanently frozen by federal authorities. Vanessa had spared no expense, eager to maximize the payout she believed she was receiving from her wealthy brother. The room was packed with the absolute upper echelon of our community. Senior deacons from our massive church congregation stood near the mahogany bar sipping top-shelf bourbon and discussing golf handicaps. Prominent city council members mingled with aggressive commercial real estate developers. It was exactly the audience Julian had demanded. He wanted everyone who mattered to witness his fabricated triumph. He wanted to cement his legacy as a brilliant provider before slipping out the back door and leaving me to face absolute financial ruin. I walked through the crowd offering polite smiles and gracious handshakes to people who respected my husband's illusions. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. Every smile I received was built on a foundation of stolen equity and deceit. Clarice held court near the center of the room, wearing a striking emerald suit and a heavy string of pearls that caught the chandelier light perfectly. She spoke loudly, purposefully, ensuring her voice carried over the smooth jazz music. She bragged to the pastor's wife about Julian's incredible work ethic, claiming her son was single-handedly elevating the entire commercial real estate market in the state of Georgia. Julian is a visionary, Clarice announced, her voice dripping with maternal arrogance. He works day and night to ensure his family is insulated from the struggles of the world. It takes a very special kind of man to carry that kind of weight on his shoulders. She gestured toward Julian with immense pride, completely ignoring my presence in the room. She was actively constructing the pedestal from which he was about to violently fall. Vanessa floated gracefully between the tables, holding a flute of imported champagne, accepting lavish compliments on the restaurant's impeccable decor. She played the role of the thriving independent business owner to absolute perfection. She laughed brightly with a group of local politicians, completely ignoring the fact that her enterprise was currently surviving on a stolen $300,000 lifeline ripped directly from my ancestral home. Terrence stood quietly behind her, offering polite smiles to the guests, but his eyes were darting nervously toward the exits. He knew the money was dirty, but his cowardice kept him firmly chained to his wife's sinking ship. I watched them all, my expression locked into a pleasant, vacant smile. They were dancing on the deck of a doomed vessel, completely oblivious to the catastrophic iceberg I had placed directly in their path. I scanned the room and spotted Diego Morales holding court at the primary VIP table near the front stage. He wore a tailored silver suit that screamed Miami excess, his collar unbuttoned to reveal a thick gold chain resting against his chest. He swirled a glass of expensive scotch, looking incredibly smug, acting as if he owned the entire city of Atlanta. I was calculating the massive commission he believed he would receive the moment the Panamanian wire transfer cleared tonight. He caught my eye across the crowded room and offered a slick, patronizing nod. He thought I was just the clueless wife, a minor obstacle easily bypassed by superior men operating in the shadows. I nodded back, my face completely serene, knowing that his offshore banking accounts were currently being flagged by federal investigators. Then my gaze shifted toward the back of the room, lingering near the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. There she was, Elena. She wore a simple black dress, attempting to blend in with the hired catering staff. She carried a small silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, but she was not serving anyone. She was standing perfectly still in the shadows, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her stomach. She watched Julian with wide, adoring eyes, waiting for the clock to strike midnight, so they could rush to the private airstrip and begin their new life in Cabo San Lucas. The sheer audacity of bringing his pregnant mistress to my birthday dinner was staggering. It was the ultimate display of his pathological arrogance. I wanted all his toys in one room. He wanted the thrill of watching his two lives collide without anyone noticing the impact. I maintained my absolute composure. I did not glare at her. I did not give away a single hint of my awareness. The ambient noise in the dining hall began to quiet down as a waiter tapped a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The jazz quartet faded their music to a soft, lingering chord that commanded the room's attention. Julian stepped confidently onto the small elevated stage at the front of the dining hall. He looked immaculate in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his smile bright, magnetic, and completely lethal. He picked up the microphone from the stand, his presence instantly commanding the unwavering attention of every single person in the room. He loved the spotlight. He breathed it in like oxygen. "Thank you all for coming out tonight." Julian began, his deep, resonant voice echoing smoothly through the high-end sound system. "We are gathered here to celebrate two incredibly important milestones. First, the closing of a major commercial portfolio that will bring unprecedented growth to our community." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Clarice clapped the loudest, beaming at her son. Julian held up a hand, playing the humble, grateful servant. "I pride myself on integrity," he lied smoothly. "In this business, your word is your bond, and honest hard work is the only path to true wealth." The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. But more importantly, he continued, his tone shifting into something sickeningly sweet and reverent. "We are here to celebrate the birthday of my beautiful wife, Chloe." Julian extended his hand toward me. The spotlight shifted, illuminating my crimson gown. I smiled, playing my part, projecting the image of a deeply moved, grateful spouse. "Behind every successful man is a woman who anchors him," Julian declared, looking directly into my eyes with a gaze so intensely fabricated it made my skin crawl. "Chloe is my simple, loyal rock. She keeps the home fires burning. She manages the quiet, everyday details so that I can go out into the world and handle the heavy burdens of business. She is the quiet strength that allows me to build our empire. She does not ask for the spotlight. She prefers to stay in the background, supporting my vision without question. She knows that a man must lead, and she follows with grace and beauty." The patronizing nature of his speech was a masterclass in misogyny and deceit. He was publicly reducing my entire existence, my brilliant career, my fierce independence to the role of a domestic servant. He was cementing the narrative that I was clueless, dependent, and entirely reliant on his financial prowess. The church elders nodded in deep approval of this traditional dynamic. Vanessa smirked, taking a slow sip of her champagne. Diego chuckled softly at his VIP table, knowing the cruel truth behind the charming words. Julian raised his crystal glass high into the air. "So tonight I raise a glass to my own recent success, and to the woman who stays home and waits for me to conquer the world. To Chloe, and to the massive, unstoppable future that awaits us." The entire room raised their glasses in unison. A chorus of congratulations and cheers filled the elegant dining hall. I raised my own glass of sparkling water, maintaining eye contact with the man who had just forged my signature to steal my grandmother's legacy. I smiled the widest, most radiant smile of the entire evening. The crowd saw a woman overwhelmed by her husband's public declaration of love. Julian saw a naive fool completely blinded by his charm. I set my glass down on the crisp white tablecloth. I reached into my structured designer handbag and allowed my fingers to brush against the cold plastic of the wireless microphone receiver. The time for pretending was officially over. The trap was fully loaded, the doors were locked, and the executioner was ready to take the stage. I stood up slowly from the table, ensuring my movements were graceful and measured. The applause from the crowd was still rippling through the extravagant dining hall. I picked up my designer handbag and walked toward the elevated stage where Julian stood. He watched me approach with that sickeningly arrogant smile, fully believing I was coming up to play the part of the emotional, grateful wife. As I ascended the 3 short steps, I slipped my hand inside my bag and gripped the small wireless receiver. Rochelle had given me clear instructions on how to bridge the connection. The soundboard for the restaurant's audio system was situated just behind the main podium, partially concealed by a lavish arrangement of white orchids. I walked up to Julian, wrapping my free arm around his waist, and leaned in for a brief performative embrace. The crowd clapped louder, entirely charmed by the display of marital affection. Under the cover of that embrace, I reached behind the podium and slid the receiver into the primary audio jack. A faint, almost imperceptible click confirmed the connection was live. Every word I was about to speak would now be broadcast with pristine clarity through every speaker in the Velvet Magnolia. Julian pulled back and handed me the heavy silver microphone. He leaned in close to my ear, his breath warm and laced with expensive bourbon. "Make it quick, baby," he whispered. "I have a flight to catch." I smiled at him, a genuine, chilling smile. I took the microphone and stepped to the center of the stage. The room quieted down immediately. Hundreds of eyes locked onto my crimson gown. I looked out at the sea of prominent faces. The church elders, the city council members, the aggressive real estate developers. I saw Clarice sitting straight-backed and proud. I saw Vanessa hovering near the bar, already counting the money she thought she had secured. And I saw Elena hiding in the shadows near the kitchen, waiting for her stolen happily ever after. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight." I began, my voice ringing out smooth and perfectly steady. Julian is absolutely right. A successful man does need a strong foundation. He needs a partner who handles the details. He needs someone who quietly manages the numbers behind the scenes so his grand visions can become a reality. For 7 years, I have been that woman. I have analyzed every contract, reviewed every ledger, and monitored every single transaction that flows through our household. Julian nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the loaded implication of my words. He gestured for the crowd to applaud my humility. They obliged, raising their glasses to the dutiful wife. I let the applause wash over me, savoring the absolute absurdity of the moment. It was the last time this room would ever clap for Julian. But tonight is not just about celebrating the past. I continued, letting my gaze drift across the VIP tables. Tonight is about securing the future. It is about recognizing the specific partnerships that make these massive financial transitions possible. Because a man cannot move mountains entirely on his own, he needs specialized help. My eyes found Diego Morales. He was sitting at the premier table, leaning back in his velvet chair, looking utterly bored by my domestic speech. He took a slow sip of his scotch, waiting for the tedious wife to finish talking so the men could get back to congratulating themselves. I locked my gaze dead onto him. The sweet, supportive tone vanished from my voice. My posture shifted from the submissive spouse to the apex predator. I gripped the microphone tightly. "Diego," I said. The sudden, sharp use of his first name broke the polite rhythm of the room. Diego blinked, his glass hovering halfway to his mouth. Julian frowned, slightly confused as to why I was directly addressing his Miami broker. Then I unleashed the weapon they had given me. In perfect, lightning-fast, ruthlessly authoritative Spanish. My voice echoed like thunder through the high-end sound system. "Diego, did you really think transferring $2 million of stolen funds to Panama would go unnoticed?" The impact was instantaneous. Diego froze entirely. His smug expression evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a vein. I did not stop. I maintained my relentless, flawless Spanish, rolling every consonant with the exact cadence my grandmother had taught me. I made sure every single syllable sliced through the air with lethal precision. By the way, I continued in Spanish, my voice ringing out with terrifying clarity. The account was frozen 48 hours ago for federal wire fraud. The FBI is already tracing your Miami accounts. They know about the shell corporations. They know about the forged notary stamps. The money never left American soil, Diego. You are entirely trapped. The reaction was catastrophic. Diego dropped his heavy crystal glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. The sharp crash echoed violently through the silent dining hall. Amber liquid splashed across the polished wood and stained his expensive silver trousers. He did not even look down. He just stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the realization that he was looking at a federal prison sentence. The rest of the room sat in dead silence. The church elders, the politicians, the family members. None of them spoke Spanish, but they all recognized the sudden violent shift in the atmosphere. They recognized the tone of an executioner reading a death warrant. They saw the absolute terror radiating from the Miami broker. Julian stood frozen beside me on the stage. His handsome face was contorted in a mask of total incomprehension. He looked from Diego to me, his brain desperately trying to process the impossible reality unfolding in front of him. The supportive, naive wife he thought he was leaving behind was suddenly commanding the room in a language she supposedly did not know, detonating his master plan with ruthless efficiency. "You speak Spanish," Julian stammered in English, his voice trembling, stripped of all its former arrogance. I turned my head slowly and looked my husband directly in the eyes. I let the silence hang for a long, agonizing second before delivering the killing blow. Fluently, I stated in English, my voice freezing the ambient temperature of the room. My grandmother was Afro-Cuban, the same grandmother whose house you just forged my signature to mortgage. A collective gasp ripped through the dining hall. The word forged hit the audience like a physical shockwave. The facade of the perfect, successful real estate broker shattered instantly. Clarice dropped her hand from her pearls, her jaw going slack. Vanessa stopped walking, her champagne flute trembling in her grip. Julian stepped back, physically recoiling from me, as if I had just drawn a weapon. His eyes darted wildly around the room, realizing that his most guarded criminal secret had just been broadcast through a microphone to every prominent figure in his professional and personal network. "What are you talking about?" Julian croaked, attempting a desperate, pitiful lie. "Chloe, you are making a scene. You are confused. Stop talking." "I am not confused, Julian," I replied, my voice steady, projecting absolute authority over the entire restaurant. "I am fully enlightened. I know about the $2 million hard money loan you took out by forging my name on the deed to my ancestral home. I know you plan to drain our joint accounts tonight and leave me to face the massive balloon payment. I know you scheduled a midnight flight to Cabo San Lucas to escape the debt." Julian was shaking now. The sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his immaculate appearance. He raised his hands, trying to placate me, trying to shut me up. "Chloe, please, put the microphone down. We can talk about this at home." "We do not have a home anymore, Julian," I countered coldly. "But do not worry, the bank will not be foreclosing on my grandmother's property, because I filed a formal fraud report with the Atlanta Police Department yesterday morning. The loan you secured is now legally categorized as a criminal liability, and the deed to my grandmother's house is safely locked inside an irrevocable blind trust. You cannot touch it. You never could." The devastation on his face was absolute. The realization that his entire financial heist had been intercepted and neutralized crushed the breath out of him. He looked toward Diego for help, but Diego was already backing away from his table, his eyes darting frantically toward the restaurant exits. Diego knew the feds were coming. He knew Julian was a sinking ship, and he had no intention of going down with him, but I was not finished. I turned my attention to the back of the room, locating the exact spot where the pregnant 24-year-old receptionist was hiding in the shadows. "And as for your little golf trip with the investors tonight," I announced, ensuring my voice carried perfectly to the kitchen doors, "Elena can go ahead and unpack her resort wear. The offshore funds you promised her are hard frozen in Panama, pending an international money laundering investigation. There is no beach house. There is no fresh start. There is only federal wire fraud." Elena let out a sharp, horrified cry. The entire room snapped their heads toward the back, exposing her hiding spot. The church ladies covered their mouths in shock. The city council members exchanged grim, calculating looks, immediately distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of Julian's crimes. Clarice marched forward, pushing her way to the front of the stage. Her face was flushed dark with outrage. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are a liar!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the room. "You are a bitter, jealous liar trying to ruin my son because you could not give him a child. Julian would never do such things. He is a man of God. He is a provider." I looked down at my mother-in-law. I felt a surge of profound, cold satisfaction. She wanted to defend the monster she had raised. She wanted to prioritize her social standing over my financial execution. She was about to learn exactly how thoroughly her golden children had destroyed her precious family image. "I am not lying, Clarice," I said calmly. "And Julian is not the only provider in this family. Vanessa has been quite busy as well." Vanessa froze near the bar. The blood left her face. She looked at Terence, who had already buried his face in his hands, completely paralyzed by fear. I reached into the pocket of my gown and pulled out my smartphone. The trap was fully sprung, the audience was captivated, the predators were cornered. It was time to unleash the avalanche of evidence and bury them all alive. I held my smartphone up the screen, glowing brightly in the dim lighting of the dining hall. The time for words alone had passed. People could argue with accusations, and Julian was a master at spinning narratives, but documentary evidence was entirely immune to his charm. I looked toward the back of the room, past the stunned faces of the church elders and the horrified gasps of the city council members. I caught the eye of my best friend Rochelle. She was sitting comfortably at a corner table, her posture perfectly relaxed. She gave me a single sharp nod and raised a small black remote control in her right hand. Earlier this evening, Julian had arranged for the restaurant's massive flat-screen monitors to display a continuous romantic slideshow of our marriage. Photos of our wedding day, our vacations, our seemingly perfect life had been looping for hours to set the mood for his grand deception. Rochelle aimed the remote at the central broadcasting hub and pressed a single button. The screens flickered abruptly. The smiling images of Julian and me vanished, replaced by a glaring, high-resolution scan of a legal document. The sudden shift in lighting bathed the entire dining hall in a harsh, clinical white glow. Every single eye in the room snapped toward the massive displays. I raised the microphone to my lips. "What you are looking at," I announced, ensuring my voice resonated with absolute authority, "is the primary loan origination document for a $2 million hard money mortgage. Look closely at the property address listed at the top of the page. It is not one of Julian's commercial real estate ventures. It is my late grandmother's historic residential home in the Sweet Auburn district. A property that is legally solely in my name." I paused, letting the weight of the location sink in for the older members of our community who understood the sacred value of generational wealth in Atlanta. "Now look at the bottom of the document," I instructed. Rochelle clicked the remote again, zooming in on the signature line. "There is my signature supposedly authorizing this massive predatory loan. And right next to it is the official notary stamp validating the entire transaction. The stamp belongs to Diego Morales. The same Diego Morales currently trying to sneak out the back door." All heads turned to Diego, who was frozen halfway to the exit, caught like an animal in a spotlight. "I have officially verified with independent handwriting experts and the Atlanta Financial Crimes Division that this signature is a complete forgery," I stated, my voice echoing off the velvet walls. "Julian manufactured this document to steal the equity of my ancestral home. He handed the deed over to predatory lenders to extract $2 million in cash." The murmurs in the room escalated into loud, undeniable gasps. Men in tailored suits loosened their ties, suddenly suffocated by the sheer magnitude of the fraud displayed before them. Julian stood completely paralyzed on the stage beside me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The undeniable visual proof had stripped him of his greatest weapon. He could not charm his way out of a high-definition forgery displayed on a 50-inch screen. Rochelle clicked the remote once more. The screen transitioned to a new document. It was a wire transfer receipt complete with Julian's corporate letterhead, his shell company details, and the offshore routing numbers. "This is the destination for the stolen equity." I continued, my pace relentless. "A private bank account in Panama." As I mentioned earlier to Diego in Spanish, Julian scheduled this exact wire transfer to clear tonight, leaving me holding a massive fraudulent debt while he fled the country. He thought he was untouchable. I thought he could use his respected standing in this church and this community to completely mask a multi-million-dollar international money laundering scheme. The senior deacons of our congregation men, who had previously praised Julian as a pillar of the community, now looked at him with absolute unconcealed disgust. They had been used as props in his criminal play, and they realized it instantly. But a man does not go to these extraordinary lengths just for money, I said, shifting my gaze to the dark corner near the kitchen doors. He needs a motivation. He needs a reason to burn his entire life to the ground. Rochelle hit the button for the third slide. The screen flashed again. This time it displayed a medical billing invoice from an exclusive, highly expensive private clinic in Buckhead. The patient name printed clearly at the top was Elena. This is a medical invoice for premium prenatal care and an advanced obstetrics ultrasound. I explained, my voice, devoid of any sorrow, projecting only the cold, hard facts of an audit. Look at the payment details at the bottom of the screen. This invoice was paid in full using funds directly routed from Julian's primary commercial real estate brokerage account. He has been using his business revenue and eventually my stolen equity to fully fund a luxury condo and private medical care for his 24-year-old pregnant receptionist. Elena let out a sharp, devastated sob, shrinking back against the kitchen doors as the entire room stared at her. She had believed Julian's promises of a glamorous life in Cabo. Now she was publicly exposed as an accessory to a federal crime her medical records displayed for Atlanta's elite to scrutinize. Julian finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, broken rasp. "Chloe, stop," he begged, his hands trembling as he reached out toward me. "Please, you are destroying everything." I stepped back, disgusted by his proximity. "I did not destroy anything, Julian. I am just providing the receipts." Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Clarice pushed her way to the very front of the stage, her face twisted in a mask of absolute fury and denial. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "Lies," Clarice screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "These are all fabricated lies. You doctored these documents to ruin my son. Julian is a good, righteous man. He provides for this family. You are a bitter, barren woman who could not give him what he needed, and now you are trying to tear down his empire out of pure spite. Do not believe a single word she says. She is trying to humiliate us." Clarice turned to the crowd, her eyes wide and frantic, desperately trying to rally the church elders and the prominent politicians to her side. "Julian has built homes for our community. He has donated to the church. He is the victim of a vindictive, unstable wife." I looked down at my mother-in-law. She was willing to completely ignore documented federal fraud to protect her precious social standing. She was willing to throw me to the wolves to preserve the illusion of her golden boy. She wanted to play the victim. It was time to show the audience exactly what kind of family this truly was. I simply brought my smartphone up to the microphone. I opened the audio application and pressed play on the file I had secured during the Sunday afternoon cookout. I turned the volume on my device to maximum, allowing the microphone to pick up the sound and blast it through the restaurant's heavy speakers. The ambient noise in the dining hall died instantly as the distinct, unmistakable voices of Terrence and Vanessa filled the room. The audio began with Terrence, his voice tight with sheer panic. "You need to send the money back immediately, Vanessa. I looked at your boutique's corporate ledger this morning. The $300,000 Julian wired you last week did not come from his personal checking account. It is dirty money. The routing numbers trace back to a massive collateral loan payout." The entire room gasped. Clarice froze, the color completely draining from her furious face. Then Vanessa's voice echoed through the speakers, sharp, arrogant, and dripping with disdain. "Keep your voice down, Terrence. You are acting like a pathetic coward. My boutique was facing total bankruptcy. Julian simply did what a good, successful brother does and bailed his family out. The specific source of the cash is not our problem to worry about." The audio continued with Terrence pleading about federal wire fraud and Julian leaving for Cabo with Elena. Then came the final, devastating nail in the coffin, delivered in Vanessa's own vicious tone. "Chloe is an absolute idiot. She does not know the first thing about real money or corporate leverage. Julian handles her completely. When he leaves, she will cry, she will file for a messy divorce, and she will accept whatever scraps the court gives her because she is too weak and embarrassed to fight back publicly." My brother is securing his own happiness, and he secured our business in the process. Our family's image and our financial standing in Atlanta matter significantly more than her pathetic feelings. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. The perfect, untouchable facade of the ultimate black society. Family shattered into a million irreparable pieces in real time. The evidence was irrefutable. The entire family was complicit. They were a coordinated ring of parasites who had actively participated in my planned financial execution. I looked over at the bar where Vanessa had been holding court all evening. The champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with total suffocating horror. Her reputation, her business, her entire social identity evaporated in front of the very people she so desperately wanted to impress. The prominent politicians she had been laughing with just moments ago physically stepped away from her, treating her like an active contagion. Terrence stood a few feet away from his wife. He did not yell or try to defend himself. He simply sank onto a velvet chair and buried his face deep in his hands, completely paralyzed by the realization that his cowardice had just cost him everything. He knew the federal authorities would be dismantling his life by morning. Clarice looked like a woman who had just watched her entire world burn to ash. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The church ladies she had gossiped with earlier were staring at her with unvarnished judgment and condemnation. The community respect she cherished more than oxygen was gone forever. She was no longer the matriarch of a powerful, righteous family. She was the mother of a common thief and the defender of a criminal enterprise. I looked out at the broken, devastated faces of my husband's family. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. They had assumed I was weak. They had assumed I would prioritize their precious family image over my own survival. They had severely underestimated the destructive power of a woman who built her life entirely on her own terms. Julian stood beside me, thoroughly broken. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he realized there was no escape, no charming lie that could save him from the visual and audio evidence currently looping in the minds of his entire network. The audience of high-profile guests began to murmur, the sound rising like an angry swarm. Cell phones were pulled out. Messages were being drafted. The scandal of the decade was unfolding before their eyes, and the elite social circles of Atlanta would be dining on the ruins of Julian's family for years to come. Deacons shook their heads in profound disappointment. Prominent investors who had trusted Julian with their capital were already dialing their legal teams, eager to sever any ties with his corrupt brokerage firm before the federal indictments went public. I stood in the center of the stage, breathing in the cool, conditioned air of the restaurant. The heavy, suffocating pressure of playing the dutiful, ignorant wife was completely gone. I had stripped them of their wealth, their pride, and their freedom. I had protected my grandmother's legacy and exposed their deceit to the world. I held my head high, the crimson fabric of my gown standing out like a beacon of absolute victory amidst the wreckage of their shattered lives. I was the architect of their downfall, and the view from the top was breathtaking. The fragile silence that hung over the VIP dining hall shattered in an instant. The catalyst was not Julian, nor was it Clarice. It was Diego Morales, the Miami broker who had spent the entire evening projecting an aura of untouchable arrogance, finally snapped out of his paralyzed state of shock. The reality of federal prison, the freezing of his international accounts, and the absolute destruction of his shady brokerage firm collided in his mind. He turned his gaze from the projector screen directly to Julian. The look in Diego's eyes was not just anger. It was pure, unadulterated, homicidal rage. Diego lunged. He did not care about the prominent church elders or the wealthy politicians standing just feet away. He vaulted over the premier VIP table, his expensive silver suit catching the harsh light of the projector. His heavy leather shoes kicked over chairs and sent crystal champagne flutes flying across the polished hardwood floor. Julian barely had a fraction of a second to react before Diego crashed into him on the elevated stage. The impact sent both men tumbling backward into the heavy velvet curtains draped behind the podium. "You set me up, Diego," roared his Miami accent thick with fury and panic. He grabbed Julian by the collar of his custom-tailored charcoal suit, hauling him upward, only to slam him back down against the wooden floorboards. "You brought the feds right to my front door. You told me she was a clueless idiot. You told me the money was clean." Julian scrambled desperately, raising his arms to shield his face from Diego's incoming fists. He was completely out of his element. Julian was a man who fought his battles with forged signatures and passive-aggressive insults, not physical violence. He shoved his hands against Diego's chest, gasping for air, his perfectly groomed image disintegrating into that of a pathetic cornered animal. "It was a mistake," Julian choked out, his voice cracking with terror. "I can fix this, Diego. I can make the calls. Let me go." "You cannot fix federal wire fraud," Diego screamed, landing a heavy blow against Julian's jaw. The sound of bone-meeting fist echoed sharply through the microphone that had fallen to the stage floor. The dining hall erupted into absolute chaos. High society manners completely vanished. Wealthy investors shoved past each other, desperately trying to put physical distance between themselves and the violent brawl. The jazz quartet had long since fled their instruments. Clarice screamed for someone to help her son, her voice shrill and grating, but not a single man in the room stepped forward to intervene. The city councilman and the senior deacons stood frozen, watching the man they had praised just 10 minutes ago get beaten on stage by his own criminal accomplice. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with the radioactive fallout of Julian's exposed crimes. Diego realized the futility of beating Julian. Physical violence would not unfreeze his Panamanian accounts, and staying in the restaurant would only guarantee his arrest. Survival instinct took over. He released Julian's ruined collar, shoved him violently aside, and scrambled off the stage. He shoved his way through the panicked crowd, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy glass double doors at the front entrance of the restaurant. He was operating on pure adrenaline, desperate to reach the street and disappear into the Atlanta night. But he was entirely too late. As Diego sprinted toward the exit, the massive glass windows at the front of the Velvet Magnolia suddenly illuminated. The deep, rich purple hues of Vanessa's interior design were violently overpowered by the rapid, blinding flashes of brilliant red and blue. The strobing lights of multiple police cruisers cut through the darkness outside, casting long, frantic shadows across the dining hall walls. The sirens wailed a deafening, piercing sound that completely drowned out the screams of the remaining guests. Rochelle had timed the execution perfectly. She had sat in the back of the room monitoring the exact progression of my speech. The moment I presented the forged mortgage documents on the screen, she had sent the final definitive text message to her contact at the Financial Crimes Division. The holding pattern was officially broken. The trap was sprung. The heavy glass doors burst open. 6 heavily armed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives stormed into the restaurant. They moved with absolute terrifying precision. They did not hesitate. They did not ask politely. They completely locked down the venue, fanning out to secure every single exit. "Atlanta Police Department," the lead detective bellowed, holding up his badge. "Nobody moves." Diego froze just 10 feet away from the doors. He raised his hands slowly into the air, his chest heaving, his silver suit stained with spilled scotch and sweat. 2 uniformed officers immediately flanked him, grabbing his arms and slamming him face first against the mahogany bar. The clinking of heavy metal handcuffs echoed sharply over the ambient panic of the room. Diego offered no resistance. The Miami broker knew exactly how the game ended when the federal authorities finally caught up. The lead detective, a tall man with a stern, unyielding expression, marched directly down the center aisle of the dining hall. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He did not look at the frightened church elders or the stunned politicians. He walked straight toward the elevated stage where Julian was currently struggling to stand. Julian pulled himself up, swaying slightly. His custom suit was torn at the shoulder. His tie was ripped awry. A dark, ugly bruise was already forming along his jawline where Diego had struck him. He looked down at the detective, his eyes wide with a frantic, begging desperation. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, completely reverting to his charming, manipulative persona, hoping he could talk his way out of a federal arrest warrant. "Officer, there has been a terrible misunderstanding." Julian stammered, his voice weak and shaking. This is my birthday party. That woman my wife, she is deeply confused. We are dealing with a private marital dispute. You do not need to be here." The detective did not even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of official stamped legal documents. He stepped up onto the stage, entirely invading Julian's personal space. "Julian Hayes," the detective stated, his voice ringing out loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "I have a warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with first-degree forgery, grand theft, and federal wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Julian physically recoiled. He shook his head wildly, the last remnants of his sanity fracturing. "No," Julian shouted, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "No, you cannot do this. I am a prominent business owner. You are ruining my reputation." The detective did not entertain the argument. He grabbed Julian by the shoulder, spun him around with forceful, practiced ease, and shoved him face first against the floral arrangement decorating the podium. The white orchids crushed under Julian's weight. The detective kicked Julian's legs apart and wrenched his arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Julian's wrists with a harsh, definitive snap. The sound signaled the absolute permanent end of his freedom. Suddenly, a piercing, hysterical shriek tore through the dining hall. Elena burst from the shadows near the kitchen doors. She ran forward, completely disregarding the police officers securing the perimeter. She stopped at the edge of the stage, her hands clutching her pregnant stomach, her face twisted in a mask of absolute horror and devastation. She had spent the entire evening imagining the pristine beaches of Cabo San Lucas. She had envisioned a life of luxury funded by millions of dollars. Now she was watching the father of her child being arrested for federal crimes, realizing that the money was entirely gone and her future was completely destroyed. Julian, Elena screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Julian, tell them to stop. What about our flight? What about the baby? You promised me. You promised we were leaving tonight." The entire room stared at the weeping 24-year-old girl. Her hysterical admission completely shattered whatever microscopic shred of doubt remained among the guests. Any politician or elder who thought Julian might actually be the victim of a vindictive wife was immediately proven wrong by the presence of his desperate pregnant mistress. Clarice stood frozen near the front tables, forced to watch her golden boy be humiliated and handcuffed while his secret life wailed in front of her prestigious friends. Julian turned his head, awkwardly restricted by the detective's grip. He looked at Elena, his expression a mixture of shame and panic. He had nothing to offer her. The lies had completely run out. Then, in a final pathetic act of desperation, Julian locked eyes with me. I stood just a few feet away on the stage. My crimson gown was completely unwrinkled. My posture was perfectly straight. I looked down at the man who had promised to love me, the man who had forged my signature to steal my generational wealth. Julian's eyes begged for mercy. He silently pleaded with me to intervene, to call off the lawyers, to save him from the catastrophic consequences of his own boundless greed. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity. I did not blink. I stared right through him, my expression radiating the cold, absolute finality of a glacier. I watched the detective haul Julian upright. I watched as the officers grabbed him by the arms and forcefully marched him down the steps of the stage. They paraded Julian Hayes right through the center of the dining hall. They marched him past the church elders who had praised his integrity. They marched him past the investors who had trusted his acumen. They marched him past his weeping mistress and his horrified mother. It was the ultimate unvarnished walk of shame. The flashes of red and blue police lights illuminated his ruined face as they shoved him violently through the front doors and directly into the back of a waiting squad car. I remained standing on the stage until the doors swung shut. The immediate threat was neutralized. The execution was complete. I did not scream in victory. I did not gloat or taunt the broken family left behind in the restaurant. A queen does not stoop to mock the peasants she has just conquered. I simply turned around and walked gracefully down the side stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me, immediately stepping back in absolute reverent silence. They looked at me with a mixture of profound respect and genuine terror. They knew they had just witnessed a masterclass in vengeance. I walked slowly across the dining room floor. I passed Vanessa, who was still leaning heavily against the mahogany bar. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick black rivers. She was staring at her phone, likely watching the alerts pour in as the aggressive collection attorneys began freezing her corporate boutique accounts. Terrence remained seated, completely immobilized by the impending reality of his own bankruptcy. I did not spare them a single word. Their punishment was already in motion. I reached the VIP table where Diego had dropped his drink. I calmly picked up my designer coat from the back of the chair. I draped it elegantly over my shoulders, smoothing the fabric with steady, deliberate hands. I reached down and grasped my left ring finger. With a smooth, decisive motion, I slid the heavy diamond wedding band over my knuckle. I placed the diamond ring precisely in the center of the table, placing it directly next to the sharp, jagged remains of Diego's shattered crystal glass. The symbolism was pristine. The marriage, the lies. The entire era of my subjugation was broken, discarded, and left permanently behind. I turned toward the exit and walked out the front doors of the Velvet Magnolia. The cool, refreshing night air of Atlanta washed over my face, carrying the crisp scent of rain and absolute freedom. Rochelle was standing by her car at this edge of the parking lot, an unreadable victorious smirk playing on her lips. She opened the passenger door for me. I stepped out of the flashing police lights and walked into the darkness. My head held high, completely undeniably untouchable. The drive away from Midtown Atlanta was the quietest, most peaceful journey of my entire life. Rochelle navigated the slick rain-washed streets with a serene, terrifying focus. We did not play any music. We did not need to speak a single word. The heavy, suffocating weight of my fraudulent marriage had been lifted from my shoulders, left entirely behind in the wreckage of that upscale dining hall. I rolled down the passenger, letting the cool, damp night breeze wash over my face. The scent of wet asphalt and blooming magnolias filled the car, replacing the suffocating aroma of expensive cologne and deceit. I watched the city lights blur into streaks of gold and crimson, feeling a profound, absolute sense of rebirth. The storm had passed and the earth was washed entirely clean. 6 months have passed since that spectacular Friday night. The autumn air in Atlanta has turned crisp, bringing a refreshing chill that completely banished the oppressive summer humidity. The social and political landscape of our community has drastically shifted, reconfigured entirely by the seismic shockwave of Julian's public execution. The federal justice system does not operate on charm, and it certainly does not care about a man's arrogant standing in his local church. Julian is currently sitting in a stark, heavily fortified federal detention center. He has been denied bail multiple times. The prosecuting attorneys presented the judge with the 2 passports I found hidden in his leather duffel bag, along with the digital receipts for the midnight flight to Cabo San Lucas. He was immediately classified as an extreme flight risk. There are no tailored Italian suits in his wardrobe anymore, only standard-issue, shapeless correctional uniforms. His meticulously groomed appearance has completely deteriorated. The man who needed constant adoration is now just another inmate number. His downfall was greatly accelerated by his own partner in crime. Diego Morales, the man Julian thought he could manipulate and impress, turned state's evidence within 48 hours of his dramatic arrest. Diego recognized that Julian's arrogance had led them straight into a federal trap, and he retaliated with ruthless self-preservation. Diego handed the authorities every single encrypted ledger, every unrecorded email, and every fraudulent offshore routing number he possessed. He traded Julian's entire criminal network for a reduced sentence. Julian is now facing a maximum penalty for first-degree forgery, grand theft, and international wire fraud. He will spend the best years of his life locked in a concrete cell, entirely stripped of the power and prestige he valued more than oxygen. The collateral damage to his family was equally absolute and utterly devastating. The morning after the restaurant raid, aggressive collection attorneys, armed with the civil liability motions Rochelle had successfully filed, descended upon Vanessa and Terrence. The predatory lenders realized Julian's primary collateral was a fraudulent mirage. They immediately executed the legal attachment to the $300,000 of stolen funds funneled into Vanessa's business. The federal authorities and the IRS moved in perfect tandem. Federal agents literally walked into Vanessa's high-end fashion boutique in the middle of a busy afternoon, ordering the staff and customers to leave the premises before changing the locks on the heavy glass doors. Her entire inventory of designer clothing and expensive accessories was seized to satisfy the outstanding fraudulent debts. Because Rochelle had successfully pierced the corporate veil, the massive liability crashed directly into their personal assets. Vanessa and Terrence were forced to liquidate their imported sports cars, their retirement investment portfolios, and eventually their extravagant suburban home. They are currently wading through a brutal, highly public, and humiliating bankruptcy process. The social elite of Atlanta, the very people Vanessa had tried so desperately to impress and cater to, severed all ties immediately. Nobody wants to be associated with a family currently under intense federal financial investigation. Terrence lost his lucrative corporate job. Vanessa lost her coveted high society status. They are now complete social pariahs reduced to living in a modest, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, drowning in legal fees and public disgrace. Clarice, the proud, vicious matriarch who had publicly defended her golden boy and shamed my career, was utterly destroyed by the scandal. The mega-church congregation, which had been her primary domain of influence and power, quietly but firmly asked her to step down from all her leadership committees. The senior deacons, who had witnessed the damning audio recording of her family's complicity, wanted absolutely nothing to do with her toxic presence. The pristine, untouchable legacy she had built her entire identity around is completely gone. She spends her days in absolute isolation, forced to witness the total collapse of the empire she thought she had secured. Elena, the young naive receptionist, who thought she was flying off to a Mexican paradise, was left with nothing but unpaid medical bills and a shattered reputation. The luxury condo Julian had rented under his shell corporation was immediately repossessed when the corporate accounts were frozen by the authorities. She was forced to move back in with her parents, carrying the heavy burden of a highly public scandal. She learned the hardest possible lesson about trusting men who build their dreams on stolen money. While their world burned to the ground and turned to ash, my world flourished in the bright, unfiltered light of truth and liberation. I am currently sitting on the expansive wrap-around wooden porch of my grandmother's historic home in the Sweet Auburn district. The late afternoon sun is casting long, warm golden shadows across the meticulously preserved floorboards. I have a steaming mug of jasmine tea resting on the small wicker table beside me. The neighborhood is quiet, filled with the rich, enduring history of my ancestors. The irrevocable blind trust Rochelle established worked with absolute flawless precision. The predatory lenders attempted to file an aggressive lien against the property, but they were immediately blocked by the ironclad legal fortress we had built. The forged mortgage was officially nullified by the federal fraud investigation and my undeniable forensic evidence. The deed to this beautiful, historic home remains entirely free and clear, secured exclusively in my name, protected for generations to come. I walk through these spacious rooms, touching the vintage wallpaper and the antique brass fixtures, feeling an incredible, profound connection to my Afro-Cuban grandmother. Her strength, her language, and her enduring legacy literally saved my life. I honored my sacred promise to her. I protected our bloodline's wealth from a parasite who tried to consume it. My professional life has also experienced an explosive, unprecedented surge in the wake of the scandal. The dramatic, highly publicized takedown of Julian's fraudulent real estate network became legendary within the Atlanta financial sector. Corporate executives, powerful board members, and high-profile investors realized the sheer magnitude of my forensic accounting capabilities. They saw the meticulous, lethal precision with which I dismantled a multi-million-dollar international money laundering scheme from the inside out. I confidently resigned from my previous advisory firm and opened my own independent forensic financial agency. I formally partnered with Rochelle to offer comprehensive audit and legal defense services to high-net-worth clients and major corporations. We are a unified, terrifying force in the courtroom and the boardroom. We are currently turning away business because our client roster is completely full. I went from being dismissed as a simple number cruncher who likes to stay home to becoming the most sought-after, feared, and respected financial auditor in the entire state of Georgia. I do not hide in the shadows anymore. I do not downplay my intelligence or diminish my capabilities to make a fragile, insecure man feel powerful. I wear my expertise, my rich heritage, and my native Spanish fluency as shining badges of absolute honor. I recently renovated the entire top floor of my grandmother's house into a state-of-the-art home office, where I command my growing business empire entirely on my own terms. I take a slow, deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I look out at the beautiful, vibrant neighborhood surrounding me, feeling the solid wood of the porch beneath my feet. There is no lingering bitterness in my heart. The fiery anger that fueled my execution strategy has completely evaporated, leaving behind a solid, unshakable core of confidence and profound peace. I did not just survive a brutal betrayal. I orchestrated a flawless masterclass in ultimate justice. They thought because I was quiet, I was blind. They thought because I prioritized family, I was weak. But a strong woman doesn't just survive betrayal, talo destrui. She destroys it. Have you ever been pushed to the point where you had to let your actions do the talking? Share your story. Below, hit that like button and subscribe if you know that the best revenge is a life beautifully lived.